Here we go.
Did you want to say anything, Larry, or do you want me to just dive in?
No, just dive right in.
All right. Well, one last sip of water.
This is awesome.
And make a piece of gum so the mouth will just go down. All right. So, welcome to the 2021 Louisiana Master Naturalist Herpetology Workshop in conjunction with the Herpetology Collective and Louisiana Exotic Animal Resource Management. I can't pass up any sort of captive audience to talk about reptiles for 2 hours on them, so I'm very pleased that y'all are able to come. We're broadcasting on Facebook as well, so if you wanted to go back later and, catch anything that you might have missed or review anything, the whole thing should be posted. All right. So the objectives of this course are to familiarize attendees with basic herpetological concepts, familiarize all with some commonly encountered reptiles and amphibians in our area, a little bit about identification of local venomous reptiles, introduce you to some of their conservation concerns, and hopefully give you an appreciation for these diverse and fascinating animals.
Your red ear's fixing to
Oh, yeah.
It's fixing to be free.
Well, you're just going to sit in here with her and do down with her if you feel better. I don't know if y'all can hear me okay online. We just got a good rainstorm going on, so it is what it is. All right, so an overview of this talk. We have 8 segments: diversity and classification, biology, physiology, and reproduction, natural history, ecology and distribution, conservation, observation, local species, and if we have some time, we're going to talk a little bit about helping you improve your identification skills and have a little quiz. That part's optional. All right, so get a few notes out of the way. If you're a naturalist and you didn't sign in earlier, make sure to sign in before you go to get credit. My book, which we'll talk a little bit more about later and is sitting on the table, you can download for free. The link is on the back cover of the book. You can also buy it afterwards. I'm going to sign copies for anybody that wants them. I run 2 organizations that you should definitely check out on Facebook. We got a real active social media presence. I'll make sure you have those links before you go. But here's the website links over here on the board. The top one is for the naturalists, the middle one's for the classes, the online courses, and the last one's for our rescue center and rehabilitation center. If you're not already a member, consider joining the Master Naturalist Association. And also consider becoming a friend of the Refuge. The Refuge is getting that 30-foot long dugout canoe that was found in the Red River a few years back, and they're raising funds to do an interpretive display for its arrival. So everybody that can join and pay a little bit of dues and maybe come volunteer once in a while is a great help. It's certainly needed. All right, so if you're one of our online folks or for one of our members that's here, the time that you spend watching this or being here also counts towards your certification programs. Take a break if you need one. I'm just going to basically talk myself to death, so don't wait for a break if you need to go pee or something like that. There is a door right across the hallway to knock on, and the ladies will let you in and point you where the bathroom is. Even though I have an upbeat pace, stop me and ask questions anytime, and I'll stop in between segments and point towards y'all and make sure that you have a few opportunities for questions if you're shy while I'm talking. Any of y'all online, if y'all ask questions in the live video, I can't monitor it right now, of course, but I will come back and answer those later. All right, so you asked earlier, who am I? It kind of goes to toot your own horn, but I think that people should know who they're listening to. I am not a PhD. I don't even have an associate degree. My learning did not come from college. It came from a lifetime of exploration and research and curiosity. I'm a Louisiana Master Naturalist and Wildlife Rehabilitator. I'm the author of A Primer on Reptiles and Amphibians. I'm the editor-in-chief of an online publication called The Natural World. I'm the founder of a lot of groups, especially Live Snake Identification and Discussion, which y'all should all join so that you can improve your ID skills. skills. I'm the president of Learn, president of the Herp Collective. I'm the Herpetology Curriculum Chair of the International Wildlife Rehabilitation Council, and I was the 2018 recipient of the Laszlo Award for Advances in Herpetology because of my outreach and educational work that I do. Scientists don't generally want to be doing this. Scientists want to be researching. They want to be gathering data. They have to be writing proposals to get approved for stuff. All of those things that scientists do is different than reaching out to the public like this. So what I hope that all of you are doing as a part of the Master Naturalist course or as a part of one of our programs is learning the science that we know. And then the goal is for you to share that with others. It's not just to store it away in your brain so you can say you know something. It's so you can learn how to share this knowledge in understandable ways with other people. Conservation can't be something that happens on the other side of the world. Conservation has to be a daily part of our dialogue with our groups and organizations and people that we interact with. And that's what I try to foster by doing this. Alright, so herpetology is the study of reptiles and amphibians. Reptiles means creeping things, amphibians means double life, referring to the metamorphosis, being a casual turned into a frog, that's where the double life part comes in. They're not all that closely related. A lot of people think for some reason that they're in the same biological group since they're studied as one thing, but indeed they're quite different. Other than being tetrapods, meaning four-legged animals or animals that evolved from four-legged animals, that's about as closely as they're related. They're grouped and studied together because they do have a lot of the same physiological, behavioral, and ecological similarities, like they inhabit the same habitats, a lot of them do. But I think a lot of it is just that the same type of people that like to catch lizards are the same type of people that like to catch frogs, and so that's how they ended up being grouped together in my opinion. So, part one. Any questions before we dive into the lessons? Alright. Don't fret. This is the only slide that's full of words. I put it at the beginning so we can get it out of the way. Because the reason this is so full of words is because reptiles and amphibians are amazingly diverse. People think of them as these simplistic, instinct-driven animals with no social behavior, so on and so forth. They're when you learn about them, you get to know them, they are exquisitely diverse and endlessly fascinating. For example, they inhabit every continent except Antarctica. They inhabit land and water, including the oceans. They live from mountaintops down to underground. They're diurnal, meaning daytime active, nocturnal, meaning nighttime active. Crepuscular, anybody know what crepuscular means?
Yes, twilight.
Active around dawn and dusk. Yes, and seasonal. Many can go for months and some for even years without eating. There was a scientist that kept an old salamander in a cool environment to see how long it would live without eating. Not that I approve of necessarily all of the methods that science has from a perspective of the individual animal, but regardless, how long do you think that, take a guess at how long that salamander lived
5 years.
without him ever eating? 12 years. 12 years, in fact, yes. Their abilities to adapt and conserve energy and whatnot are just astounding. They range from high visual acuity, meaning can see very well from a distance, to blind.
Who's blind?
Oh, I mean, there's blind snakes. There's blind snakes that live right over in Texas, not too far from us.
Like, are they really blind, or if they're born that way?
Yes.
Then they were born without that capacity.
Correct. There's certain salamander species that evolved and live in cave structures, underwater, rivers and things like that have no light and would have no use to see, and therefore cannot, even if you bring them out into the light, they just don't have the receptors for it. Some actively forage, meaning they go out and look for breakfast, like rat snakes. Others are ambush predators, meaning they sit and wait for something to come by, like rattlesnakes. Reptiles are at the zenith of longevity in many areas, meaning, for example, the box turtles that live around here have been anecdotally recorded to live in excess of 100 years. So, they're our longest lived animal that we're living around. There's a lot of debate on how old some of those alligator snapping turtles get. We're not going to dive down that rabbit hole today. But the point is, they're some of the longest lived critters you're going to find. They live in the hottest deserts, Others freeze solid in the winter, like you can wrap on them like a rock. And wood frogs, for example, are famous for this. And then in the spring, they have natural antifreeze that occurs in their cells that keeps the ice crystals from causing the damage to their cells that we get in those situations, and they fall back out in the spring and chop away. They hunt by constriction, venom, luring, tongue adaptations, many other methods. Their diets range from prey as large as buffalo to as small as termite larvae. Some lay eggs, others give live birth. Many can give birth without mating. They exhibit almost every color imaginable, with many displaying dramatic and vivid color changes. There's many species that don't drink water, and some species, including ones that live around here, that don't even breathe air.
How do they give birth without mating?
Good question. We're going to have a slide about that. Amphibians are known for their metamorphosis, encompassing very different forms in their lifetime. Several species have been reported to change their sex. Some can change how the sex of their offspring is determined if their environment changes. They are herbivores, omnivores, carnivores, insectivores, and all kinds of other specialties. They get around in numerous ways, and some can even run on water, and some are hydrophobic. There's some little lizards that even if they fall off the branch onto the water, in a rainstorm, they are unsinkable because their body naturally repels water so well that it's impossible for them to sink down in the water and drown. So that's all of the lots and lots of words out of the way. We're going to flow a little easier after that. For anybody that's nervous about snakes or reptiles in general, I like to point out that at least you live around here. Well, some of y'all don't online, but in some parts of the world they have snakes that fly. They actually glide, but still, they glide for quite a way, and they're really good at it. And there's geckos and lizards and stuff that fly. And this is a photo from a Southeast Asian hotel saying, "Dear guests, the door of the balcony has been locked to ensure your safety. Please close the door and window at night to prevent flying reptiles. Thank you in advance for your consideration." Now, for all of the bad translations out there, they could have been saying mosquitoes, but there are reptiles that can fly indoors in other parts of the world that we don't have to worry about around here. And then there's some parts of the world, this is the Komodo dragon, where you could be going to the restroom and find him laid out on the tile in front of you. He'd be quite a surprise in the middle of the night, I would imagine.
Yeah, you won't want to see him. Doesn't he bite you and he toxics you and then he eats you?
They are predators, certainly. Human Komodo interactions, conflicts are pretty rare because they're pretty well protected and watched over in the areas where they occur. All right, so we talked about reptiles and amphibians not being particularly closely related. I found that when it came time to make a list of their similarities and differences, it was a little more challenging than I had thought it was going to be. Here's what I came up with. The similarities between reptiles and amphibians, they're ectothermic. Ectothermic is the scientific term for what you probably call cold-blooded. I don't like the term cold-blooded more from a PR perspective. We associate cold-blooded with being mean or sinister or vindictive in our minds. And it's not all that accurate. Their blood can actually be warmer than ours when they're out basking and soaking in the heat. So cold isn't the only thing that they are. Ectothermic means that they regulate their temperature through behavior from outside sources like the sun. Both reptiles and amphibians have lots of species that can alter their skin color. Both reptiles and amphibians have members with excellent eyesight, and they also display a lot of the same defensive traits, such as camouflage, biting, inflating their body to look more menacing, autotomy, we'll go into that, that's the fancy word for breaking their tails off, and mimicry, one harmless species looking like another dangerous species. The ways that they are different. Reptiles are amniotes, amphibians are anamniotes. Those are a couple more scientific terms that we'll go into a little bit later. It means their eggs are different. Reptiles do not undergo metamorphosis. Reptiles breathe via their lungs as opposed to cutaneous, meaning through the skin, respiration in many amphibians. Reptiles can turn their heads. They have multiple vertebrae in their neck, so they can articulate. Amphibians, frogs, and salamanders, and caecilians don't have a neck that they can turn. They have to turn their body to look around. Reptiles tend to exhibit greater longevity, like we mentioned about the box turtles. Some reptiles possess auroral pits, which is essentially a way of seeing in the dark, a heat-sensing mechanism. And some amphibians use a lateral line, which may detect changes in water. So like salamanders underwater, when they're hunting, they have a line in their body that detects slight movements so they can hone in on prey more easily without necessarily hearing it or smelling it.
What about a turtle when it's roommating? How does it breathe?
Good question. Through their butts. Their oxygen needs are so low when they're that cold that a slight amount is all they need to get through the winter. So they can take water in through their cloaca, the opening that they excrete waste through, and absorb the oxygen through the mucus lining inside and get just enough to get by through the winter. And then once things warm up and they need more oxygen, the ice thaws and they can breathe air again.
How do you tell if, for example, how do you tell, like, that yellow belly spiders are yellow belly spiders? Because most turtles have yellow.
Good question. Yes, how can we tell a yellow belly slider is a yellow belly slider when we're looking at a turtle with a yellow belly, since lots of, particularly aquatic turtles, have yellow bellies? And my answer to that is the same as it is with any other identification question: through practice and repetition. I advise people to join our groups and other groups that I have, so people can post IDs. But even if you're not posting an ID, if you're following that group and every day you're seeing all these different pictures of reptiles and amphibians, and then look at the ID provided, you get to learn it through repetition. Like when you see a McDonald's sign out there, you know that that's McDonald's without having to, go inside and find out. You've seen that McDonald's sign so many times that just by second nature, you know immediately what that is. I say that there's certain characteristics that can help, of course, when you're identifying things, and that's what field guides are good for. They're going to tell you how you differentiate similar species specifically. But the answers are different for every species, and the only short answer is you learn by practice. So, common names. That's the right next slide, yes? Yes. So, this gets to be a big thing when people are discussing reptiles and amphibians. There are, even with scientific names, but common names, there's all kinds of different names for critters. Like one of my biggest pet peeves with IDs, and this is just me being grouchy, is people that call, I have a broad-headed skink over here, a young one. The young ones have blue tails. A lot of people call them blue-tailed skinks. There's nothing wrong with that. But there is actually a skink called a blue-tailed skink on the other side of the world, but this is not. So if you're talking online with somebody, there's plenty of Australian people that are active on Facebook, and if you go around saying, I caught a blue-tongued skink this morning, they're going to be like, aren't you in the U.S.? So it can cause confusion. However, there's nothing wrong with using whatever terminology is familiar to your culture. So if you are saying, I saw a chicken snake in the yard the other day, and you're talking to somebody else that calls a rat snake a chicken snake, and that's what the people around you have called rat snakes for years, there's nothing wrong with calling that animal a chicken snake. It does get confusing. You basically just have to learn that stuff as you go. Some animals, like cottonmouths, if you get on Wikipedia, I think there's 42 different names that people call them just in the southeast here where they live. So it can really get busy. But there are official, now that's quote-unquote official common names that go by the quote-unquote scientific names. And
What does SAR mean?
the SSAR is the Society for the Study of Amphibians and Reptiles. They are, in my opinion, the premier scientific organization in North America for the study of herpetology. There are other excellent organizations, such as the International Society for Ichthyology and Herpetology. But the reason that they're mentioned on here is the SSAR puts out every few years a revised list of these names. And for the purpose of people like me, an author that needs to, wants to conform to a certain set of guidelines when they're writing their book, we would pull from those names so that other people reading it know exactly what we're talking about without confusion. So, scientific names, I love taxonomy. I can sit around and, dive into rabbit holes, learning about how, the indigo snake's scientific name says that it's the lord of the forest, which it really is because they're such awesome predators. You were talking about the Mediterranean geckos, Hemidactylus tursicus. That tursicus is referring to Turkey, where they're from. There's so much that you can learn from scientific names. A lot of people just gloss them over. I'm not going to harp on it, but I do encourage people to at least be open-minded. If you get to a point in your curiosity that brings you to wondering about scientific names, they can be educational, they can be useful, they help you learn the relationships between these different animals, and there's a lot to be learned from that if you take the time to do it. Alright, so we got this huge array of life on Earth here, and the ones that we're talking about is this little section over here, reptiles, which what surprises a lot of people from an evolutionary perspective, phylogenetic perspective, reptiles and birds are grouped together. Birds being considered in this same block with the reptiles. But I promise I wouldn't go deep into taxonomy. So the last thing I'll really say about it is in our local area, we have these orders. They're all reptiles and amphibians are in the kingdom Animalia, meaning they're animals. They're in the phylum Chordata, meaning they have spinal cords. And then from there, they break into amphibia for the amphibians, with Caudata being salamanders, and Anura being frogs. And then Reptilia, which we have Crocodilia, Testudines, which is turtles, Squamata, which is lizards and snakes around here. I'm guessing y'all can guess what Crocodilia is. American alligator is what we have around here.
I'm actually on the feed, and they're asking if someone asks a question, if you repeat it, because they can't hear it.
I will try, yeah. I did that with this, but I'll do it again. And I'm sorry, guys, I get a pretty dry mouth when I'm doing all this talking, so you'll just have to excuse me taking these frequent sips of water all the time. I bought this stool specifically so that I could plant my behind in one spot and not be so twirly, but I get animated, so it is what it is. We'll try the stool again. We'll see if it works this time. Alright, so the number of known reptiles and amphibians is in constant flux. We lose some through extinction. We discover others that we didn't know were there. It doesn't matter when you're looking at a list, it's going to be different than the list that was printed last month. But for the purposes of giving you an idea, when I wrote my book, these were the numbers of species. There's 24 crocodilian species, 1 tuatara, which are cool little critters we'll mention again later. Sauria, which is the lizards, and which is lizards, we have 6,451 species. We have about 3,700 species of snakes, 350 species of turtles, almost 7,000 species of frogs, a little over 700 species of salamanders, and over 200 species of Sicilians. And we don't have any of those around here, but those are some cool critters. We'll mention them again later.
What was that percentage out to the right of each one?
The percentage of that order, so out of amphibians, 88% of amphibians are frogs, 9% of amphibians are salamanders, and 3% of amphibians are Sicilians. And so, like lizards, have the lion's share in numbers of reptiles.
What's this Sicilian?
A Sicilian is a critter like a salamander that doesn't have legs. Is the easiest way to describe them. They're fossorial and secretive critters, so usually when they are seen is when they're trying to cross the road. And unfortunately, in the places that they live, the tropical regions that they live, there's a lot of superstitions about them. So even though they're not snakes, and people know they're not snakes, they still purposely kill them because they think that they're bad luck or a bad omen, which is unfortunate. But they're interesting little critters. You'll see some photos of them later. All right, so that was the boring taxonomy, extra sciencey part. Anybody got any other questions before we go on into biology and such? All right. Notice the water.
Okay, it would be alright if you could move your stool back about a foot.
All right, here's the water. Ready? All right. So these are just examples. I'm not going to sit and regale you with the intricacies of turtle anatomy. My classes are geared towards honing in on things that the average person might find interesting. So I try not to sit and, give you the specifics of how a snake's lungs work and all this kind of stuff. I try to give you things that people might find neat. Like earlier this morning, we found that little brown skink that had a regrown tail. That is called autotomy, which is the breaking away or removal of a body part by the animal. Lobotomy or appendectomies are surgeries where someone else is removing an organ. Autotomy is where the animal removes an organ.
Do rats do that too?
No. The people think that when you break a lizard's tail off, that they're just fragile and that you pulled it off. But what really happens is they break apart along these little fracture lines in the muscle and in the skeleton, and it's a powerful muscle contraction. So the skink basically has this tensing up that it does, which breaks off that part of the tail. And it's an excellent survival tactic because, like I mentioned on our hike earlier, if a critter is trying to bite the skink to eat it, and it takes off forward, what they're liable to catch is that tail. So that's one way that it helps the animal avoid predation. Another way is that oftentimes when those tails break off, they still have energy in the cells and they spaz out. They start flipping around. So an animal that was trying to catch the skink is going to be momentarily confused and distracted and probably go for this because of all the motion instead of the animal itself, and the animal has a chance to get away. So then they regrow their tails. Not all lizards whose tails get broken through injury or other reasons grow back, but many do. When they do, they're often a slightly different color, different size. You can usually tell that that's happening. So take care to avoid causing this because it's a defensive mechanism. It's part of how they survive. And if you carelessly catch them and cause them to break their tails off, you're putting them at greater risk of getting eaten later on. So shedding. The scientific name for shedding is ecdysis. We got this happy little gecko over here who is assisting with her ecdysis by pulling her skin off. And she's also eating that shed layer of skin so that she doesn't lose those nutrients. In the wild, as catch as catch can, you may not find a meal all the time. So digestible, edible skin that she's pulling off, she's making sure it doesn't go to waste. Do what? I don't know of any of that do. She has the snakes can eat their skin. I'm going to mention something about a critter that's not a lizard here in a little bit. I might maybe have to get it away. So usually that's a function of growth. As they grow, as we grow, we shed our skin like they do, but we shed it particle by particle, cell by cell. They shed it in a layer all at once. It's the only difference between us and them essentially. And it usually happens because they're growing and, their skin, like a lot of inverts, sheds and makes way for that growth. But it also can be a response to skin issues. If you have an animal with a fungal disease or an external parasite infestation, or even sometimes lacerations and scrapes and stuff, they can increase the frequency of that shed cycle to help get rid of those parasites and help heal that illness that's going on.
Someone on the internet had a question. Can the same animal lose a portion of their tail?
Yes, that's the purpose of them growing back. They don't always break off or work as easily the second, third, and fourth time. So there's a level of diminishing returns. The question was, can a lizard lose its tail multiple times? Sorry, I didn't repeat that. And yes, they can. That's why it grows back. But they don't want to do it more than they have to because it becomes a little less effective each time. Oh, and so here we go. The one, I thought this was on a later one, but Sicilians. Scientists wondered for a while how the babies were eating because these animals live in holes in the ground. They weren't seeing any prey. They weren't seeing the mother go out and get anything and bring it back. And it was puzzling for a long time until some scientists put a camera in one of these holes and did a time lapse. And they discovered that the mother Sicilian goes into a rapid shed cycle, and the babies have these little raspy teeth, and they go crazy all over the mother, eating that skin off just the way this gecko is doing now. And that's how they get their first few meals until they're ready to go out on their own. So when I talked about how diverse reptiles and amphibians are, I wasn't kidding. They get very diverse in the ways they do things. So a lot of people think that you can tell how old, for example, a rattlesnake is by how many buttons or segments it has on its rattle. You can tell a newborn because the newborn, they get that first segment with their first shed, which happens a few days after birth, but each segment is added with each shed, and sheds aren't something that happen like clockwork once a year. They can happen several times a year. So all you're counting is how many times they've shed, and sometimes if their tail's been broken off, you're just counting how many times they've shed since the last time they broke their tail. So it doesn't really mean a whole lot, but I mean, it gives you some indication. Turtles with more rings, turtles have what are called annuli, like trees. In each of these scoots on their back, there's little rings, which are kind of like the rings if you cut down a tree. But with trees, you actually are looking at years because those happen from seasonal changes. With these guys, again, you're looking at how many times they've shed, which happens many times when they're younger and less frequently as they get older. So it can give you an idea. This turtle with 45 annuli is a lot older than this turtle with 16 annuli. But that doesn't mean that this turtle is 45 years old and this turtle is 16 years.
Are those two numbers the same, or are the numbers of annuli general for turtles, either 16 or either 45?
No, I was random examples. They're going to get them each time they shed. All right. You were asking earlier about the snake periscope. This is the one when you said periscope, I thought you meant. This is a racer. This particular one is a black masked racer from southern Louisiana. And they're famous for this behavior of lifting up above the brush and looking around. Any snake can do that if they want to. It's just these guys are particularly famous for it. Yeah. Sexual dimorphism. That's a fancy word for males and females looking different.
It's a black racer.
That particular one is a black masked racer. There are black racers also. And they're all the same species, they're just different subspecies.
Is that what we call a coach whip?
No, they're in the same genus. All right, some people's heads online probably exploded just now because a lot of people still consider coach whips to be in the genus Masticophis, but they were recently grouped back with racers in the genus Colubrid. So don't call me an idiot that doesn't know a Colubrid from a Masticophis, all you grouchy older guys that are stuck on your taxonomy online. But anyway, no, so they're very closely related is the answer. She actually said a coach whip, but different species. So dimorphism is the external differences that you can typically see between the species. That's common in the biology. I mean, men and women are sexually dimorphic. We're not talking about gender here. Gender is a construct of civilization. It's something that we make up in our minds. The sexual dimorphism is the biological differences between the sexes. Not all herps are sexually dimorphic, and some are very subtle. I have a friend of mine online, shout out to Brian Baker, who actually went on a survey for these little brown skinks that I showed you one of this morning. And he measured hundreds of them, like with a micrometer, because they're, this big, their heads. And found that for example, the males have slightly wider heads proportionally to their bodies than the females. But it's not the type of thing that I can tell you that and you go out and be able to say, oh, that's a male or female. It's the type of thing that after you've been, doing research for a long time and picked up hundreds and hundreds of these guys, eventually you might get a feel for that subtlety. So some of these differences are very others are quite noticeable from a distance. For example, well, less from a distance, but more obvious at any rate. Turtles are an example of sexual dimorphism. And this is a female. Not all turtles are exactly the same. There's variety among species. These are just examples from a pond turtle. The female has a deeper notch in her plastron right here to allow for the eggs to come out. The males don't need such a deep notch, so you see that little bit of a shallower view there. The female's cloaca, the opening that her waist comes through and the eggs come through, is closer up to her body, and the male's is farther down. And that's so the egg only has to travel through this thick portion down here, rather than come further down the tail and have to squeeze out this little section of the tail down here. Several pond turtles also have males display foreclaws that are much longer than the female. Matter of fact, snake turtle here is an example of that.
What happens if the turtle loses its tail above the...
It would depend on the injury. Just like people, there are severe injuries that our bodies and their bodies can sometimes make up for. And you'll see the turtle over here is missing a good chunk of her face. So her nose is gone, but she's still breathing through the opening behind where her nose used to be. So it just depends on the injury and how severe it is and whether infection sets in. But so for several pond turtles, oh yeah, you're so ferocious, I know. They have these super long claws. Those aren't for digging. They use those as a courtship display. You can actually, if you're looking in clear water, you can sometimes spot the males, which are usually smaller than the females, circling around. The female will just be going around foraging, trying to eat. And the male who's feeling randy is circling around her, and he's doing this number right here with these long claws. And he's doing it right up in her face. And that's basically a pickup line for him. So that's a good way to be able to tell them apart. And so again, these are just examples with this species. But as you learn more about reptiles and amphibians, and your field guide should tell you things like this, there are ways of telling males from females oftentimes.
What's a cloaca?
Cloaca is that opening. The single opening through which waste goes, eggs go, the penis comes out, mating happens, all that kind of thing.
Which birds have too, right?
Very good, yes.
Say that.
That birds have also, she said. All right, so hemipenes. So not turtles, but snakes and lizards have a bilobed organ for reproduction. The males do, and they're called hemipenes. Basically, dual penis is what that means. Each side works independently of the other and is supplied by its own testes. So, after a male mates with a female, if he were to run into another female on the same day, he's still ready to go. He just has to use the other side. Which is a particularly useful mechanism in the wild because you may only, during a certain time of year when males and females are wandering around, might come across each other, twice in succession like that and not see another one for the whole year. So being ready to go again is pretty handy. You can often tell males from females when you've been doing this a while by the bumps behind the tails in lizards. So this is a leopard gecko. This is a male leopard gecko, and those bumps right there are his hemipenes just inside and behind his cloaca. So they, when it comes time to use them, there's erectile tissue that's filled with lymph that makes the hemipene come out and of this little area where it's stored. Then it uses it and it comes back in. These particular males, these particular males also have glands that secrete a waxy substance that the females don't have. But regardless, speaking of hemipenes, another way, not all snakes are sexually dimorphic. but all snakes do have males with hemipenes and females without hemipenes. So a reliable way of sexing a snake is to use a probe, where you take the probe and you stick it, only if you know what you're doing, so you don't injure them, into their cloaca and then back behind. And if it goes this far back, you can tell it's a male. But if you poke and come this way and it only goes this far back, it's a female, because the probe is going into the hemipene and can go in further on a male. So, particularly with youngsters, for some species that don't develop dimorphism until they're older, that's the surefire way of being able to tell males from females. And so this is a picture I took at the Master Naturalist Convention a few years ago, down by Alexandria. This is the male. He's got his tail wrapped up under the female. And so his hemipene on the right side is inside her right now. If he was on the other side of her and wrapped his tail around the other way, then he would have used the other side to mate with her. And they come in a lot of different shapes. That's another way you can tell what kind of snake a snake is. Not the average person, but like scientists that are out studying, and maybe they find a dead animal on the road and there's not a whole lot left of it, but they do manage to have an intact tail, and they avert these hemipenes and the different shapes can tell them what species they're looking at.
What's dimorphism?
The differences between males and females that we were discussing.
So they're not born different.
The appearances, the difference in appearance. So like the cardinals, the males are bright red with the black, mask across their eyes, and the females are a duller brown color, which helps them be more camouflaged on the nest. So it's a tactical advantage, so to speak. That difference in color between the male cardinal and the female cardinal is an example of sexual dimorphism. It doesn't mean, it's not referring to their different organs or how their body operates. It's the visual differences that you can see, where you can just glance at a critter and say, that's a male, that's a female, without having to do stuff like probe them and, be in a lab doing science and stuff to figure it out. All right, so this is another hot button topic online, to the point where I don't even allow people to argue about this in my groups. I'm so tired of it. I'm over it. I'm done. Bring it somewhere else. But for the purpose of knowing one thing from another, we're going to discuss it here so we know correct information. Poison is a toxin. Well, it doesn't have to be a toxin, but a toxin that is a poison is either ingested, meaning eaten, or absorbed through the skin. So the dart frogs that are so famous for being poisonous down in the rainforests, that's a toxin that gets absorbed through the skin that can be quite deadly. So you would call that a poison. Venom is injected via fangs or stingers or whatever. Of course, venomous snakes are our famous example of that in the reptile world, but wasps, bees, ants, there's lots of examples of it in the animal kingdom. It's not just venomous snakes that inject venom. And there's another category that most people overlook that they actually just came up with a word for relatively recently in the past, 10 years or so. Toxungan is delivered to the body surface without a wound. So if you've heard of the spitting cobras over in Eastern Hemisphere, that venom that they spit out and project at the animal that can then get soaked through the eyes or the skin or something like that would be a toxungan, meaning that it's a toxin that doesn't have a specific delivery method. It's not delivered by either a wound or contact with the body surface. But you only need to know that last one if you're a geek like me. Most people aren't. I need to remember that name for later. But the easy way for people to remember for most people is poisonous means if you bite it, you die. Venomous means if it bites you, you die. That's an oversimplification, of course, but that's the basic difference. The reason why we don't allow this argument online is someone that is not a herpetologist, just a layperson, who wants to know if it's safe for their kid to play on the swing in their backyard, asks, is this snake poisonous? And then the reptile geeks have to come in, snakes aren't poisonous, they're venomous. And then somebody else that knows a little bit more about them has to come in and say, well, actually, some snakes are poisonous. And then other people are like, no, I know what I'm talking about. And it's ridiculous, and it will go on forever, every day, if you let people do that. It's unreal how bad it gets online. I tell people the main thing to remember is that the person you're speaking to understands what you're saying. You know, I mean, if a person asks you if this snake is poisonous, unless you are a moron, you know what they're asking. You know, they just want to know if they can go in the yard safely. So trying to take it to this other off topic to what they were trying to find out direction is counterproductive. It makes people less interested in hearing what you have to say.
And
So.
they don't want to ask you questions.
Right.
They don't want to learn anymore.
The idea is for people to keep coming back for more info. Now, I mentioned in my mock argument that some animals are both. Here's an example: the tiger keelback, that and a couple other African species have venomous components to their saliva, but they also have poisonous excretions from nuchal glands in their neck. So they're both venomous and poisonous, meaning you wouldn't want to get bit by them and you wouldn't want to eat them. So this is an overview of how fangs work, and it's different for vipers and elapids and rearfang snakes, but around here, and in a lot of places, vipers are the famous ones, so cottonmouths, rattlesnakes, that kind of thing. So this is a picture of a rattlesnake. They have a gland right here that compresses, it squeezes, and it forces the venom through this primary duct and this secondary duct out through the fang. Elapids are another type of venomous snake, coral snakes, mambas, kraits, cobras. They also have a similar gland, but it's not nearly as pronounced. So they don't have these bulges behind their head that you see in the vipers, but they, essentially operate the same way. There's some slight differences to the way their teeth are shaped and, where the openings are and that kind of thing. But this is an overall example of how these things work.
The venom comes like through their tooth.
The venom does. It comes from that duct, that gland, through this duct, through their gums, their teeth, which is inside their protective sheath, and out like a hypodermic needle.
The animals that still, is it still venomous?
A snake that has been decapitated or otherwise killed, unless the brain is destroyed completely, can still inject by reflex action for at least a half hour or more afterwards. So there are plenty of examples of people that ended up in the hospital because they chopped the snake's head off, thought it was harmless, went to pick it up and throw it away, and got envenomated in their hand as they were picking it up. So handle it just like you treat every gun as if it were loaded, treat every snake as if it were alive. All right, so then we also have rear fang snakes. Some people don't know there is such a thing. Other people have heard of it and don't really know what it means. This is a hognose snake. This particular snake is a Mexican hognose. And this is a real good photo where you can see these two little fangs in the back of their mouth. Some people think that coral snakes and other elapids have rear fangs. They do not. Their fangs are in the front. They're simply fixed. A viper has fangs that retract and can come out to use. Elapids have small little teeth that are fixed in place. And then rear fang snakes have small little teeth that are fixed in place in the rear. These guys typically are not dangerous to humans. There are a few examples like the twig snakes and boom slangs of Africa that can be very dangerous. None around here. So when somebody asks for an ID on these animals online, they like to say they're harmless to humans, which also causes an argument because people are like, it's going to make me have a heart attack. That's not harmless. And it can also cause swelling. I don't know of any records of a wild hognose that's ever bitten anybody and caused any sort of reaction. But what you get, like in captivity, somebody's trying to feed their hognose. Hognoses aren't particularly bright when it comes to eating time. They'll try to eat the dish, the water dish, or whatever is handy. And if a person is holding something out and the hognose bites them, and a person's like, oh, look how cute, and they go to get their phone and take a picture, and they're sitting and letting that hognose hang on to their finger for 3 or 4 or 5 minutes, most people will get a swelling in their arm and a numb feeling and a dull ache for a couple of days. And a lot of people think, oh, well, you're just allergic to them. No, that's the reaction to the venom. They do have venom. It's just that it's very weak. It's not something you're going to have to go to the hospital for. And the only way that you would even get a reaction is not a natural interaction. It's, captivity or somebody picking one up and thinking how cute it is and just letting them sit there for a while with those teeth in contact. It's just a small amount of venom, but it's kind of like a wasp sting. Question?
Why is the homeless snake defense mechanism playing it?
Good question. I think we have a slide about that, but we can talk about it now. The question was why do hognoses play dead? That is a defense mechanism. The scientific term is thanatosis. The Greek god of death was Thanatos, and hognoses are not the only snake that do it. There's a lot of snakes that do it. If you follow the snake groups, you'll see surprising records of all kinds of different critters doing it. In the wild, there are animals that only eat living prey. There are other animals that only eat dead prey. There are some animals that don't care whether it's living or dead. If it's food, it's food. Cottonmouths are great examples of that. They're garbage disposals in the wild. But for an animal that doesn't eat dead prey, an animal that is that thinks it's going to be preyed on, that can manage to look and smell dead, is going to get passed over by those kind of animals. So he may still get eaten by a vulture that doesn't care whether he's dead or not, but another critter that does care, we pass him on by. So it's kind of, rolling the dice and seeing if it helps.
What about the snakes? Please.
We'll get there. I think we might be getting there here in just a minute. No, not quite there. All right, so geckos. Most of you know that they can walk on walls, walk on glass. The little green anoles that live around here also have these structures. And people wonder how they manage to walk on this, smooth surface. We used to think, or some people still think, that their feet are just sticky, like, a piece of adhesive tape. That's not the case. Their feet that you can see, it just looks like toes, but as you look closer, you see that there's these lines, not suction cups. Then when you start to look really close, this, is 75 micrometers for scale. You start to see that it's even finer little, hairy type structures. And when you start to look really, really close, you find that each of those hairs, this is a micrometer right here. These little filaments on the end, called spatulae, are much smaller than that. So what's going on is it's kind of like static electricity. There's a static force that's generated when one thing touches another. And without getting all technical, the point is that they basically can interact through static electricity and electromagnetic forces to stick to things the same way tissue paper sticks to a balloon. And it's actually so effective that when scientists discovered this, they started looking at them under microscopes and experimenting and realizing how effective this was. They couldn't understand how they could pull their feet back up at all. And so they did more and delved deeper, and they found that they roll their feet up, sort of like if you have a piece of tape on a window and you were to try to pull the whole piece of tape off at once, that's not going to happen. You grab it from one side and you peel it back. And that's the same way that those little filaments on their toes interact. It's peeled up filament by filament as they walk. So forked tongues, you were just asking. So snakes and many lizards that have this also, like a monitor lizard here, have forked tongues, and that's for smelling rather than tasting. Their tongue flicking samples the air. Sometimes they do it slowly, sometimes they do it quickly. Particularly when they do it quickly, they create a couple of little vortices of swirls of air. And that mixes the air up and makes even more particles gather onto it than just like passive breathing like we're doing. Then they pull their tongue back in to this organ, one term for it is vomineral nasal. Another common term is Jacobson's organ. So they pull their tongue back, and either side transmits those particles to that organ, which then transmits that information to the brain. And just like our ears can tell which direction the sound is coming from, their tongue can tell which direction smells are coming from. So if a snake is coming across a mouse trail, he can often, it's not foolproof, determine which direction that smell is stronger and know which way to follow to find the critter instead of going away from it. So it's a pretty fascinating adaptation. When you see a snake that somebody's holding or that you're looking at in the wild and it's flicking its tongue, that's what it's doing. It's trying to find out more about you. You're a big thing that's moving, and just like we've been using our sense of smell and ears and eyes, they're using their sense of smell and everything that they can to gather info. Snakes don't have external ears. They do have some rudimentary structures inside their heads, so we know they can at least hear some low frequency sounds. But they don't hear like us, and they can't hear a lot of the things that we can hear. So their eyes and that remarkable tongue is how they gather most of their data. So scales, also called scoops, have a lot of different characteristics to them. We're just going to mention, from a naturalist perspective, one thing to pay attention to is whether they're keeled or not. And you can tell why they're called keels if you know, like on the bottom of a boat, has that keel down the middle. Each of these scales over here has a keel going down the middle of it also, so that's why it's called that. Then the other snakes, like these king snakes here, have perfectly smooth scales. That's part of their scientific name is lampropeltis, means shiny shield. Lamp, shiny, pelt, shields used to be made out of animal pelts. Because their scales are so shiny and smooth. Just an example of what I was talking about earlier when I said taxonomy can be interesting. All right, so toxic toads. Toads are poisonous.
Let me ask you something.
Go ahead.
The keeled scales, is that a poisonous variety? Or?
No, there are, just like with other IV characteristics, there's venomous snakes that are and venomous snakes that aren't. Rattlesnakes, for example, have heavily keeled scales. Copperheads, cottonmouths have weakly keeled scales. Coral snakes have smooth scales. You have other, critters in the rest of the world, like bush vipers, that have ridiculously keeled scales.
So it's not fail-safe method to determine?
It's not at all. The water snakes around here have heavier keels than moccasins do.
Gotcha.
Go ahead.
Don't water snakes have feathered patterns and river snakes have pattern patterns?
No, there aren't any real quick, easy to learn tricks like that. And we'll go into that later when we get into the IV section. Alright, so toads. You may have heard that toads are poisonous and not really know what they meant. You may have picked up a toad and noticed these little glands behind your head on either side. Those are called parotid glands, and they excrete a toxin called a bufotoxin. And animals that aren't adapted to be resistant to that toxin can become ill or impaired if they try to eat a toad and ingest that toxin. Now, nature is a never-ending arms race. So we have toads that have developed this defense mechanism. Then you have water snakes and other similar animals that have developed a resistance to that mechanism, and it just goes back and forth all the time. But so some snakes, like plain-bellied water snakes, for example, around here, eat toads every time they see them with no ill effects. Other snakes or critters might come along. I would like to point out an example of my grandparents' Yorkshire Terrier. He would go outside at night sometimes, and he'd come back in acting crazy and frothing at the mouth. And my grandfather couldn't figure out what on earth was going on, because this happened a few times, until he carefully followed him around after dusk when he was in the backyard, and Nick, the Yorkies, would go over and agitate the toad, pick it up and drop it, pick it up and drop it, beat on it with his paw, and make that toad excrete these toxins, and then he would lick the toxins to get high. basically. It is a toxin, so just like many other things, people and animals use to get high. It's not a good idea. But for some reason, the dog likes it, and there's actually people that do that too. If you ever travel up around Conway, Arkansas, you might cross this little area called Toadsuck, Arkansas. That indicates people have been doing this for longer than the internet, at least. Just because something's poisonous doesn't mean you need to be scared of it. You know, this isn't a strong toxin. Don't go licking toads. If you do, you might like the high, you might not. Probably just don't chance it. But it's not like, oh my gosh, there's poisonous animals in my yard, we gotta get rid of them type of thing. So people ask me this a lot of times, when is a frog a toad? It's kind of like asking when a tree is a shrub. There's not a line saying anything taller than this is a tree and anything shorter than this is a shrub. There's not a line saying anything that's like this is a frog, anything like this is a toad. There's some people that will tell you that there's enough characteristics that there is kind of a line, but not really, in my opinion. We tend to call frogs that have drier skin with more of these bumps, which are called tubercles, toads, and ones with smoother, wetter skin that need to stay in damper environments, frogs. And while we're at it, this is frogs have a lot of different mating stances. This one is called amplexus, meaning the male has his front arms wrapped up under the female's armpits to hang on to her. This is actually a male that's doing that to another male because they get overly excited. The toads get so rampy and overly excited to the point where male toads have developed a specific chirp that's a release chirp that is basically saying, "Get off me, dummy, I'm a boy." It's past comical. We actually have a group called Frogs with Low Standards that collects photos of just this kind of stuff, frogs guessing at the wrong thing. For example, doesn't even matter if it's another frog. Oftentimes motion is all it takes for a toad to feel like he's going to give it a shot. Alright, now when I mentioned amniotes and anamniotes earlier, this is what I was talking about. The anamniotic egg that the amphibians have is a gelatinous egg. You can see through the gelatinous mass into the cells in the middle that are developing into a tadpole. And respiration, gas exchange, takes place through that whole mass as a whole into the embryo, which has a slight membrane called a riddling membrane around it. But by and large, air and nutrients are just seeping in and out, basically. The reptiles, the reason they're different is they have a much more complex structure, including an amnion, like humans do. You've heard of amniocentesis. That's, the doctor examining the female's amnion. So reptiles have that inside their eggs. So they have this yolk sac, and they have these other parts here that absorb the oxygen and give off the carbon dioxide and perform that respiration, separate from the embryo inside an amnion. And what that means is the reptiles can lay their eggs in much greater variety of places than amphibians. Amphibians are essentially tied to the water. There are some species that can lay on leaves that are hanging over water in superhuman environments, and there's always exceptions when you're talking about reptiles and amphibians. But generally, this method locks amphibians into wet environments, and this method gives reptiles the freedom to explore the rest of the planet. So here's some pictures of anamniotic animals. These are some prairie king snakes. This is a 5-line skink. These are the ones that I talked about earlier on our field hike that brood. They stay with their eggs until their eggs hatch. This is the baby box turtle. And you can see on this picture the little egg tubes like birds have when they're coming out of their egg that he uses to open it up. And coming out of the egg is tiring work. Usually once they've gotten this far, they will just sit like that for the rest of the day into tomorrow before they even bother trying to come out. It's hard work. It's the first thing they've ever done, and it's a big chore. Sometimes this is more pronounced than others. This is the remnant of the yolk sac that they finished absorbing during their first few days or week or so of life. So they don't need to eat right away. It gives them a chance to get on their feet, so to speak, before they have to start hunting. These are baby decay's brown snakes. These snakes give live birth, but they still have that amnion and a placental-like structure inside their body where the young develop. And then they come out of that amnion and structure and are birthed live instead of eggs being deposited. But they're still amniotic. So the terms we have for these different ways they do that is oviparous, egg laying. The brown snake I just mentioned is viviparous, meaning live bearing. And you'll see a lot of references in particularly older literature to a third category called ovoviviparous, which is basically both. They have eggs inside, but the eggs hatch, and then the babies are born live. But further research has led a lot of biologists to feel that that's an obsolete classification because whether there's an egg or whether it's just a placental structure, there's still this exchange going on inside the mother's body that would be going on with the eggs that are outside the body. And it's not really a different mechanism, it's just being carried in a different way, is kind of what it boils down to.
So would a rattlesnake be considered egg laying or live bearing?
All of our vipers, all of our venomous snakes in the U.S., other than coral snakes, give live birth. So when you see a snake, if somebody asks if the snake in their yard is copperhead eggs or rattlesnake eggs, you can always say no without looking, because that's not going to happen.
Well, I'd always heard that they carry their eggs inside the body, just like
Yeah.
what you just said. That's not true.
No, well, they do. The vipers don't have an egg structure like this that's inside their body. They have a much more placental-like structure that comes out like a string of Mardi Gras beads. Like if you were to run one over, grab your mother, and those eggs come out, it's going to be, sac around an embryo, sac around an embryo, sac around an embryo. And you can, kind of clean them off and wipe the blood or other fluids aside and see that embryo inside there.
Gotcha.
Yes.
Whenever I was watching the video, I saw someone posted it and this snake was giving live birth, and I don't know what type of snake it was.
Well, there are lots.
Venomous snake, but I just don't know what type it was. It was gray and it had some.
I need a picture to tell you there's so many. Our young attendee mentioned he saw a video of a snake giving birth and wasn't sure what kind it was. And I was saying I need a photo because there's so many that do. When we get into, a little bit later, we're going to list the snakes that live around here, and I can tell you which ones are live birth and which one lay eggs. And it's a lot more than you would expect. People tend to think of the live birth snakes as the minority, but in a lot of areas, there's actually more species that give live birth than there are that lay eggs. So, sex determination. We have chromosomal sex determination, the XY, XX, and then it branches off from binary into a lot of subcategories. But with animals in general, with egg laying, it's usually not a matter of the chromosomes of the parents. There are different methods, but temperature-dependent sex determination, usually called TSD, is when the temperatures that the eggs incubate at determine whether it's males or females. Usually that's high temperatures males, low temperatures females, and medium temperature ends up with a mix. Now then you have the genotypic sex determination, that's like what we have. So there are animals that do it that way too. Some animals exhibit a mixture of the two. We found some species that in certain parts of their habitat, their eggs are determined by the temperature, but then the ones that range into cooler climes, for example, the scientists wondered, well, if the eggs are determined by temperature, and it never gets this warm temperature over here that these guys have over here, how is the sex being determined, and they found that even amongst that same species in different parts of their range, these animals were exhibiting genotypic sex determination. So reptiles will surprise you anytime you think you know something about them. They surprise scientists every day. Alligators around here are examples of that. I mentioned earlier, they'll build a nest, lay their eggs in the nest, and the nest is made of decaying vegetation, and the warmth of that decay incubates the eggs. All right, parthenogenesis. How can they give birth without mating was the question earlier. And that's still a question that puzzles scientists. I mean, like, it's going to be a while before we fully understand all the details of it. But what we know is that it's virgin birth, it's giving birth without mating. There's some species, like this is a mourning gecko, that are entirely female. There's nothing but females. The females, bring about more females. Those females bring about more females. There's never been a male discovered. There's some other species that have females and males that sometimes mate and give birth that way, and other times give birth parthenogenetically. And that's thought to be an adaptation, a survival skill that would allow, like for example, a Komodo dragon has been observed to give parthenogenetic birth before, even though they usually mate. Well, on those islands of Komodo and the surrounding Fiji and whatnot, if one female were to make it to a new island and there's no males around, the ability to give even just the one-time birth of a mix of males and females would allow for sexual reproduction to start reoccurring and be the norm. But without that first input of the male, that whole branch of their population would never be able to establish there. So it's a very interesting survival trait that these animals have developed. We know of at least 50 species of reptiles that have been documented to do so far. There's some species, there's a species, Aspidoscelis needsi, or needsi, that only exists that we know of in a lab. And that gets so twisty-turny, it actually has 4 sets of chromosomes. And more about that in my book. If you want, if that concept interests you, flip to the page on parthenogenesis because it's too much to go into here. But the point is, it's a dizzying array of biology that goes into making this happen. And some scientists, spend the bulk of their career studying this. And it could be more prevalent than we know. Obviously, if you run across a critter in the wild and pick it up, you have no way of knowing whether that animal was parthenogenetically birthed or, reproduced sexually. You would have to, do scientific sampling on the tissues and run the DNA sequences, which, you just only do in the species that we're interested in and that we have the funding to search for. So who knows how common it is. All right, now then, anamniotic eggs. I was talking about being able to see through the egg mass. So this is these are young amphibians that still just, have a cellular mass in the middle with not really many discernible features. These will be slightly older. You can see the head and the body and the eye. These are tadpoles that are well developed, that you can, that swim around and you can see. Here's the marbled salamander with some eggs on land. So some amphibians do lay eggs, not in water, but in very moist environments. And then the salamanders and frogs develop, differently. They've got their life cycles. I'm not sure if that's a siren. It looks like a siren, but there's a lot of similar looking species around the world. That might be good. So I'm not an expert on the different neotenic salamanders. Somebody online is probably picking on me right now because they know just what that is. That's fine. Post it and we'll know. I'm not going to go into this in depth. Raise your hand if you've never looked at the frog life cycle. All right. Raise your hand if you don't know anything about the salamander life cycle. All right. So, then salamanders, so they start as those egg masses we were just looking at. They develop, like we were just looking at. They go from being an indeterminate little speck to being a discernible animal in there. They hatch as aquatic larvae with no legs, kind of like frog, tadpole. but they have these gill structures that allow them to breathe underwater. Then they develop legs, usually their front legs first. Some salamanders, like the sirens that live around here, only ever develop front legs. They never develop rear legs. But most of them then develop their rear legs, and their body becomes more shaped like it's going to be as an adult, and they start losing this, fins to this tail feature. And then they become terrestrial adults. And most of them live the rest of their life on land and come back to the water to mate. But other than that, are terrestrial animals. There are some that are what's called neotenic, which means they stay in water in that juvenile form their whole life. Sirens are an example, axolotls are an example. They don't have this terrestrial stage. Then there's others, like the central newts that we have around here, that have this terrestrial adult stage, and then they switch back to an aquatic stage, and they're called an F during that time. I have it backwards. They have their senior moments overtaken. They have an F stage, and then they, revert back and change again. So they have an extra step in the process.
So you mentioned newts, sirens, salamanders, and also something.
Those are all salamanders. They're just different kinds. Like you call some lizards skinks and some lizards, lizards.
How's a salamander different than a lizard?
Well, the salamanders are amphibians, so all the differences we've been talking about the reptiles and amphibians. Alright. Turtle shells. Turtles cannot come out of their shells. The shell is part of their body. It's actually an adapted part of their rib cage. You can see the spinal column fused to the inside of the center shell there. We're not going to go into all the names of the scutes, but you should at least, as naturalists, know the term carapace. That's the top part of their shell. And plastron, that's the bottom part of their shell. And then most species have a spot called a bridge, which are the pieces that fuse the top shell to the bottom shell. And then each of these other, scutes also have names, but we're not going to dig that deep. But try to at least remember carapace and plastron, because it makes it easier to identify these animals. When people are posting pictures, there's a lot of turtles that can be identified at a glance with a plastron shot that are really hard to tell apart from a carapace shot. And you can say belly, but if you want to sound smart, you can say plastron. So, snakes and swallowing. A lot of people know that snakes can swallow proportionally larger stuff than you would expect. A lot of people think their jaws dislocate. That's not technically what happens. Their jaw on either side of the lower jaw is fused to each other in their top jaw by very elastic ligaments. So it can stretch quite a bit around much larger food than an animal like us with a fixed jaw could consume. And then their glottis is where they breathe all the time, but the opening for where they breathe, which is called the glottis, can actually protrude out to the side of their mouth as they're eating. So as their mouth is full, and it takes some time to be taken in this, large prey, this is a water-eating salamander, that gives them a way to breathe without choking the whole time. Pretty interesting adaptation. So snakes move in a bunch of different ways. This isn't even all the ways, but here's the 4 commonly thought of ways that snakes move. One is called concertina. Concertina is kind of like the way an inchworm moves. Part of their body comes forward and they shift their weight onto that, and then they bring the other part of the body forward and shift their weight on that so they can, keep doing that repeatedly. Serpentine is oftentimes the most commonly thought of way that snakes move. When they're, slithering through the grass, that's serpentine motion. Then there's some snakes, sidewinder rattlesnakes, for example, that travel by essentially flipping themselves across the surface they're going over. Like with sand, that's about the only way they could get there. So they developed that unique method. And then caterpillar, which is more technically called rectilinear motion. If you watch enough snake videos online, you'll invariably see some snakes that don't even do this all the time. Some only do it once in a while, that can move forward straight without slithering or moving back and forth. And what they do is bring their belly scales forward, kind of like a centipede or millipede walking with its legs. They do that same thing with their belly scales that pulls them in a straight line. And it's a pretty good tactic if you're trying to sneak up on something. If you're looking at them straight on, it's like a tornado that's coming right from you. It doesn't look like it's moving. It looks like it's just sitting there. But all of a sudden, that snake's close enough and you can grab its prey. All right, hibernation and aestivation. I can already tell some heads exploded online. Some people say, that's called brumation, it's not called hibernation. Well, actually, a lot of the term brumation, I'm going to make y'all privy to another one of these age-old arguments that if you're not a geek, you hadn't already probably encountered. Hibernation we know of as animals, getting through the winter by slowing down. Some of them go to sleep. Some of them just become less active. Reptiles do that too. There was a scientist back in, 40 plus years ago now that recommended that we start using the term for what reptiles do in brumation, because he says, this isn't like bears and beavers and these other critters, let's give it its own name. And that name was brumation. But now that we've studied them more, we've found out that there's really an array, a spectrum of how reptiles and amphibians get through the winter. And a lot of them are more like monotremes than anything else, but without getting too geeky, we realized that rather than there being this class of animals that does things this way, and this class of animals that does things this way, and so on and so forth, it's just a big spectrum full of variety. And giving reptiles and amphibians one name is kind of misleading because it kind of lifts them out of that spectrum. So a lot of scientists are just using the term hibernation now for that reason. So their body burns fewer calories and uses less oxygen. Aquatic turtles are able to do this underwater, even under ice, by absorbing, we mentioned earlier, the water through their cloaca. Hibernating herps may be periodically active and drink water when needed, so like sometimes in the winter, especially around here where there's not a solid coat of ice on 3 feet thick and everything, you'll often see snakes or lizards out and about on a sunny day in the winter, which surprises a lot of people because they think they're hibernating. Well, they are. Their metabolism is still slowed down. They don't need to eat or drink. They don't need to eat at all. They don't need to drink so much. But it may have been a month since they took a drink, and while the sun's out, they're going to use that chance to, go get one. They're not asleep like a bear is or something like that. They don't eat at this time because their body is not warm enough for digestion. Being ectotherm, their metabolism is controlled by temperature. And then there's a similar state, not really similar, the converse activity. When it gets too hot, many reptiles and amphibians aestivate, which basically means going into a slowed down state of conservation when it's too hot to keep them from overheating. You'll very rarely see reptiles out in the full sun in the middle of a baking Louisiana 109-degree day, because they would die of heat stroke very quickly because they can't sweat or pant like endotherms can. So that was the end of section 2. That was our biggest section. What are some questions about the biology section that you may not have asked?
How do they get their what?
How do they get their legs in without getting hurt? That's a very good question. And essentially the answer is because their shoulders are inside their rib cage, which is very different than, us.
So how do they have lungs if they can't move since they're...
Another good question. We have a diaphragm that expands and contracts our lungs. She asked, how do they breathe? Their shoulders are inside their shell, inside their rib cage. So they can, basically the way we would just pull our arms up, they're doing the same thing. It's just that their arms are inside their rib cage. And they breathe by pumping the muscles in their body. You can watch a turtle.
Yeah,
Well, these guys aren't at the moment. You can watch, if a turtle is breathing heavily, you can really see they'll pump their arms in and out. And what they're doing, since they don't have a diaphragm, is expanding and contracting their lungs inside. So that they don't use the same muscles we do, but it's still a muscular activity. We have a diaphragm, a devoted muscle. They don't have a devoted muscle for it, so they have to use the other muscles in their upper body to make room for more air. That's why you'll hear some turtles make a hissing sound. If a turtle is spread out like this,
Can you put one on our table for us?
not well, we're going to get to that. If a turtle is relaxed, it's got its arms out, it's got air in its lungs, but then when you startle it and it feels the need to defensively pull back, it has to expel all that air quickly to make room for its legs. So what you hear isn't an intentional sound like they're trying to hiss at you. It's just the sound of all that air being forced out by them quickly retracting their feet into their shell. Good question.
And the back legs don't, they stop getting down, right?
Well, they all, it's different for different critters, but most turtles can get all of their feet at least inside their shell to a degree. Now, like snapping turtles, they have a greatly reduced plastron, and musk turtles, so they don't ever really get inside their shell the way an animal with a more pronounced plastron would have. But they get underneath their shell, so at least they have that armor, all the way around them on top. What time is it? We probably need a bathroom break or a few minutes.
105.
All right. Well, we're going to let the live stream keep going. Y'all can garble amongst yourselves. We're going to take 5, no more than 10.
Yeah.
It is 1:03 now. At 1:10, I'm going to start talking again, whether y'all are back in here or not. So we got 7 minutes to take a break. And again, all you guys online I'm talking to now, they asked me a couple of questions that y'all asked during the workshop, but I'm going to go back through all this later on. So feel free to be asking questions now, and I'll answer them once I get a chance. I didn't sleep much last night. I got to sleep at like 4 and woke up at like 6, so I actually can't promise I'm going to do that tonight, but this weekend in general. Anyway, we'll be back in 5. If anybody else comes on and asks where we are, let them know. We'll be right back.
Somebody bring her to you, and then you have to rescue.
Yes, she actually, I don't think, needed to be rescued. That's an old injury, as it turns out. So the fact that she was still alive when I found her indicates that she probably would have been okay. But she does have some trouble eating and hunting. So I'm considering letting her stay on as an animal ambassador and setting her up a special kind of handicap habitat where it's released for her to eat in the wild. It is. It's a western rat snake. Yep. Okay, it's just chilling for the moment. Be back in a jiff.
playing dead, maybe. He's playing dead?
Oh,
Where's the dead froggy? Right here?
yeah, it's.
Probably was an attempted predation. There's a snake in there that eats frogs.
He also pops eyes on her.
Yeah.
That's it. After this, we can catch that snake right there. It has shred on its cage. It's permanent shred.
If somebody wants to watch this on Facebook,
Saying,
how do they do it?
Sam, I have hugs.
You go to the event, if you go to any of our groups, there's a post about the event that you can click through. So, I don't know if you're in any of our groups already.
You can learn. No, I'm not, but I want to tell people about.
Well, there's a slide towards the end with the description of the groups.
I mean, so they can see it now, I mean. If that's possible,
Well, you go to the event, you can just search 2021 Herpetology Workshop. And it should probably come up in your results.
Okay.
What happened to this turtle? Is this a box turtle?
Yeah, she got skinned by a lawnmower.
Oh.
Did they tell you that, or you saw it, or what?
The lady who did it, brought her to me.
Oh my God.
I'm a wildlife rehab, so.
She must have felt so bad. Right?
That's this one.
Which one? That's a mother turtle.
Oh yeah, you got 56 people doing this, dude.
It only says 10 on it.
Well, there's one that says, oh yeah, okay. Let me share this.
Yeah, we got Warner and THC, the two nonprofits that we have like 150,000 followers, so 56 is actually a very small amount.
Oh my God, it's really good. 56 followers.
All right, so, you know what? I wanted to replace the batteries real quick in my.
Did the snakes only have red and black tongues?
No, I have all kinds of colors.
But they're all forked.
I'm unaware of any snakes that don't have a forked tongue. Among lizards, most lizards don't have a forked tongue, and there's only certain what you might consider more advanced species like monitors that have a forked tongue.
And froggies?
Frogs don't have forked. Amphibians don't have forked tongues.
Sticky tongue.
So it's primarily snakes and some lizards, not amphibians or turtles or any of that. All right. So, natural history, ecology, and distribution. I'm going to try to move through some of this stuff a little bit faster, just so we have some time for IB discussion at the end. These are just examples of how big some different reptiles get. The largest reptile is a saltwater crocodile, which has been known to get up to 2,200 pounds, followed by the leatherback sea turtle, which has been known to get up to a ton. Komodo dragons usually top out between 100 and 150, but we've weighed at least one that's made it as much as 200. Same thing, green anaconda, they can top out from 80 pounds and up, but we have found them as much as 215 pounds. On the other end of the spectrum, here's local critters, mostly, but these are babies here. that start off awfully small. This is a baby little brown snake. This is a baby musk turtle. This is a baby brown snake and a baby toad. So it's awesome how they can be so big and so small. When I was a kid, they used to call it the food chain, but we've given up on that description because the chain makes it sound much more simple than it is. Now we use the term food web because it's really connections that are being made in all directions. Snakes and amphibians, reptiles and amphibians are parts of the food web, both as predators and prey. We're never going to understand the complexity of the natural world. There's no way to. Some scientists estimate that we've discovered the high-end estimates are 30%, the low-end estimates are around 10%. But in any event, even with all the study and all the computers and all the internets and all the Googles and all the scientists, we've still only even described a fraction of the animals on the planet, much less figured out how they all interact with each other. It's dizzyingly complex.
Yeah.
What?
What is that picture of?
That is a picture of a black widow eating a ringneck snake.
That's either a little snake or a big ass spider.
Yeah. Both. It's a little. That's a big snake for its species. That's an adult. That's a small species in general, and that's a big fat mama black widow. So I've got a little thing I like to say when people ask about venomous snakes. Instead of me trying to convince them about how great snakes are, which I can do if people are up for that, but my little sage word of wisdom thing is an educator once said, you may take a part from an airplane, and yet it will still fly. You may take out 2 or 3 or 4 without apparent ill effect. But sooner or later, you will have taken out too many parts, and that plane will fall out of the sky. And that's how it is with the ecosystem. It's not our job to judge which species should be here and which species aren't. It's our job to learn to cohabitate with the amazing biodiversity around us on this planet. And when we lose any species, even if it's a species that we think of as dangerous, it's a loss that should make us sad. I mean, extinction can be a part of the natural variety of things, and certainly is. But human-caused extinctions are increasing and happening at an unforgivable and inexcusable rate, and we need to learn how to pull that back in and rein ourselves in with our consumption of resources. But hopefully we all know that by now. So camouflage. I love this topic. When I was a kid, pretty much on the weekends, you'd see me with my camouflage shorts and my camouflage vest. I had my copy of my Audubon field guide in my pocket, going out into the woods to see what kind of critters I could identify. But no amount of camouflage that you can buy in a sporting goods store is going to give you anything on reptiles and amphibians. This is a green tree frog, a rough green snake, and a great tree frog. And you can easily see how these guys don't need another layer of defense because 99% of the things that might eat them are never going to notice that they're there. This is a picture I took in Key West, Florida. Do you see, I'll even tell you what it is, the lizard in this picture. I'll even make it bigger for you. Who sees the lizard? All right. There's her head. Here's her eye, here's her body, wrapping down behind that leaf.
Oh, yeah.
It's a non-native brown knoll. She saw me coming from a ways off, and she specifically ran over to that cluster of leaves and froze like that on the theory that she looks like a leaf. And if I didn't already see her, I wouldn't have seen her.
Are those invasive?
Yes, they're not established around here to my knowledge yet. They are established through a large part of the Gulf Coast, certainly in Florida. They're extensive in Florida. They get shipped all over, like through garden shipments and things like that to Home Depot and Lowe's and nurseries and just different methods like that. I've seen them at Home Depot and Lowe's, assumably from having come in on one of those shipments. And also things like fence panels. People make fence panels, stack them up, ship them. And lizards love to hide in amongst layers and things like that. So they get moved around a lot. But luckily, to my knowledge, they haven't gotten established up here, either because it's so infrequent that males and females haven't found each other, or because our winters are too cold, or a combination of both. But these guys, which are cool little animals and great in their native habitat, are pushing out our native green anoles in the areas where they're established. People thought that the green anoles were dying off, but on further research they noticed that they were adapting and they were taking up residence in a higher layer of the canopy. So they were basically giving the area that we're in the first 6 feet to the brown anoles, so that's what we were seeing more of. And they were, hanging out higher in the bushes, higher in the trees, stuff like that.
What are they called? What did you say that was?
That particular one is a brown anole from Cuba.
Brown.
But the green,
Anole.
They are established in the waters and have been for a couple of decades now. And you can see that when I go to my sister's house, you can see the brown animals down low. And then the papers published it saying that's what they're doing, is they're pushing the wings up.
They're
They're staying higher up.
yeah, they're so abundant.
Where at?
New Orleans.
Yeah. All along the coast, it's plenty warm, so there's no reason for them not to establish. But if you look at like the climate zones, if you're planting plants and you see the little chart on the back of the planting zones, we're in a little bit different, subtropical zone up here. So we're a borderline. They could get established until we have one of these hard freezes like we had last year that only happens every so often. My guess would be, even if they did manage to start a population, they would die out during one of those hard freezes. But it can be 5, 7, 10 years between those around here. So it's hard to really track that stuff. All right, just a couple more cool examples of camouflage. Copperhead, if you don't already see it, over here, wrapped up in the leaves. Another copperhead that's not even underneath anything, laying out in the full open, showing you how easy it is for them to disappear in amongst the vegetation. All right, so who sees the timber rattlesnake? If you don't see it, I want you to think about the fact that you don't see it, because when you're out on these nature hikes, this is what you need to be training your eye to do. The reason why the middle of my book has a whole section on find the herps is twofold. Well, more than that, but from an observation perspective, one is you need to get your eyes trained to see this stuff. Because that's a big old timber rattlesnake right there in amongst those leaves. And if your eyes aren't trained to be looking for the critters that are camouflaged around you, you could step right on his face, and that wouldn't go well for either of you. So I want people to get better at spotting these critters. So not only for your safety, but also because it makes your enjoyment greater when you're able to observe more things when you're out in the woods. Most people trump, I call it walking like a white person. I try to tell people to learn how to walk like an Indian. When you're out in the woods, try to be a Native American in your head for a minute and glide silently through the paths, because you're going to come up on a whole lot more critters than if you just clomp, clomp, clomp. The people that go to national parks and stuff like that, and they get on the hiking trail, they got their hydration bladder, and they make that whole, trail in 2 hours, and they're back to the truck and they're ready to go. And it's like, why did you bother? You could have done that on a treadmill. The point to me to be out there is to slow down, to see and experience these things around us. And, I'm all for people getting outdoors, so I'm not saying don't do it, but I am, trying to be clear that if you want to observe critters in the wild, you've got to slow down and train your eyes and your mind to be observing these things, to be noticing in amongst everything else. So we're not going to delve super deep into this, but here's just a couple of graphs of the density of species. This is the density of amphibian species. The darker the red color, the more species are found in those areas. The lighter it gets, the fewer it gets. This is snake species richness. We've got a little variety of snakes in here, you can see, but the tropical and environments have much more diversity than we have in that regard. And lizards, we have some, but we're all the way over here in the green. We don't have a whole lot of lizards around here. Which again, you get these tropical areas, these rainforest areas, and you get a whole lot more diversity. And you have to chuckle. You look at Australia, and it's just one big red continent. Australia is the herper's haven. If you want to study or see lizards, they've got the most lizard diversity by far. Of any red mountain crab.
Go back, Mike. What is this? Is that a misspelling or?
Good question. Amphibians. Earlier we were talking about Sicilians being legless amphibians. Amphibians are legless reptiles that used to be in a separate grouping, but because we've learned more about them, we've grouped them back with lizards. They just are legless lizards. Now there are legless lizards like the glass lizard around here that don't have legs. That's not what I mean. These guys, that essentially means worm lizard. These guys are fossorial, meaning they live most of their life underground in burrows. But they still have eyelids, they still have teeth, they're still lizards. They just don't have legs and are more fossorial. Alright, so as a general rule, you find larger species near the equator, and because they have higher temps, long growing seasons, and smaller critters up towards us. So like this is a tegu from the tropics here in the western hemisphere. They get up 4 or 5 feet. This same family of critters, the Tiidae, this is a 6-line race runner that lives around here. This is the same family, but here you've got the little versions, and down in the tropical areas you've got the big versions. And it's that way with a lot of things. We don't have any 17-foot anacondas or anything like that up in this subtropical environment that we're in. You need to have those bigger growing seasons to support that. But you can kind of see similarities, just off topic, but on these photos. These lizards are in the same family, and even though they're quite different, you can see they've got this same kind of triangular head shape with the distinct brow lines going down either side of their short snouts. And so even though these lizards can live on different continents and occupy very different habitats, they're related genetically, but as you start to learn about the critters, you can start picking out some features that help you take a guess. I mean, if you saw another lizard with this same sort of head shape, short snout and whatnot, even if you didn't know what it was, you could probably guess and be right that you're looking at an aggregate. And that's getting back into taxonomy a little bit, so I'll stop geeking out. But here's the Amphibians and the Sicilians that we were talking about earlier. Just some photos of them. Amphibians, worm lizards, can look really odd. Then there's others that, look somewhat more normal, other than lavioles. But both the Amphibians, which are reptiles, and the Sicilians, which are amphibians, have a segmented appearance. So especially when they're small, it wouldn't be hard for a lot of people to mistake them for a worm. And actually, in other parts of the world, there's worms that get huge. So it's easy to see why they might be confused with each other. But no, these are reptiles and amphibians, whereas worms and other similar critters are invertebrates. All right, so that was another section before we dive into conservation. Do what?
What are worms?
Invertebrates. I don't know there's subclassification, but there's a whole different order.
And what separates those? I'm sorry, I'm saying this before, between those and they look like snakes too.
Well, it's all biological characteristics. To our eyes, since we have appendages, we're homing in on the lack of appendages and thinking, well, that's awfully similar to a worm or awfully similar to a snake. But that's us thinking with our humanocentric mind. Other than lack of appendages, there's a lot of different variety in these animals. So like, these being amphibians, they have cutaneous respiration, they have the metamorphosis, they have the anamniotic eggs, they've got all these characteristics that group them firmly within other amphibians. And you know, same thing with the worm lizards. They actually have so many characteristics that that's why people used to classify them as their own thing, since they lack legs. But the more we learned about them, the more that we found, gosh, 99 or 95 out of 100 things are exactly the same as other lizards, justifying keeping them in group with lizards. We were just getting hung up on these 3 or 4 obvious things over here, if you follow me. So all the differences that we've been talking about between reptiles and amphibians and other animals apply to these guys.
So
Go ahead.
you mentioned Native Americans and their posture. So have you noticed about yourself in your studies in life that you perhaps have a totem animal or an animal that you feel that has set off nature with you, or you briefly led, or you felt a kinship?
We're going to make that a topic of discussion after the workshop. It's a little off topic for what we're doing. All right, so any more? Global conservation concerns. The big one, I hope y'all all know, is the fact that there's just too many darn people. I mean, that's what a lot of the conservation concerns around the planet, most conservation concerns boil down to. Even things that don't seem to be caused by us, like wildlife diseases, even though we can't prove it, there's good reason to guess that since these diseases have been around for longer than we have been on this continent, and these animals have been around, and they were doing fine before, and now these animals are much more susceptible to these diseases, it's not unreasonable to think that the pressures that we're putting on these populations of animals are doing things like forcing them to be grouped more closely together and undergo other stresses that might reduce their immune responses and cause them to be more susceptible to these things. So I'm just saying it's more devious than just the fact that we're cutting down land and building houses. It infiltrates, the whole planet. So habitat destruction, degradation, and fragmentation are the primary conservation concerns for most species on Earth. Destruction is those obvious things like, I hope nobody over there watches this and complains, but the place across the street that cut down all this huge trees and forests and stuff, bulldozed it all, is building houses, and calls it the preserve, which I find highly ironic, would be an example of habitat destruction. Degradation would be an example of, or one example would be taking grasslands and turning it into grazing lands. That quickly becomes something different than what it was before. And it's not suitable for a lot of the animals that it was before. And fragmentation is all the roads and power line right-of-ways and everything else that we cut into the landscape that sections off the landscape into smaller sections. Not only does that isolate populations, but you also have the direct risk of road injuries and stuff as they cross these. And it also makes them more susceptible to predation. Even if there's not a road there, there's a lot of critters that, things balance out as best they can in nature, so what's bad for the rabbit is good for the hog. But, still we're changing things in ways that they weren't naturally, weren't naturally happening. And there's not much we can do about that, but we need to be thinking about it. And then we have more purposeful conservation concerns. Collection for food and pet trade. This is a photo that happened right before my, I believe it was 2019 workshop, of endangered turtles that were entering the black market and were being hoarded ready for shipments around the world. And they found a house that was just turtles stacked on top of turtles, thousands of them. And that was a huge chunk of the remaining population of these turtles. This is not a small, little side effect. This black market is very destructive to a lot of sensitive species. And the more endangered they get, the more the cost goes up on the black market. So it's a difficult situation. The solution is not just as simple as passing a ban, because oftentimes passing a ban means, hey, let's go find those guys because they're more expensive now. It takes really working with these communities and helping them find other gainful methods of feeding their families, because that's really all they're trying to do in an area where it's hard to do that. So we need to recognize that that's a complex issue and put more complex solutions in place. Climate change, of course, is a big one. Pollution, pesticides, hormones, altered pH levels, all these things that we're causing. Disease, I just mentioned, that a little bit. We'll talk about it more in a minute. Incidental mortality, while smaller than some of these others, is still a realistic problem, such as sea turtles getting caught in commercial fishing nets. Direct human interference, people purposely killing timber rattlesnakes, for example, around here. Someone asked on the hike why we don't see timber rattlesnakes in this parish where you can drive east or south and start seeing them. It's because there's more people in this parish, so there's been more opportunities for those snakes to get seen and killed over the years. And then introduced species is a huge one. Cats, rats, and goats are some of the big offenders in this area. Introduced species need to be removed and prevented wherever there can be, but again, that's one of those complex issues that, once things like, rats and mice, the black rat and the Norway rat and the house mouse are non-native species that are well established through most of the world. You're never going to cork that bottle back up, But you do need to try to be controlling them as much as possible and not killing the snakes that are eating them and trying to help us out with that problem. Every time somebody kills a snake, they're making the invasive species problem worse. So, preservation and management. There's things that were put in place and are working on, like habitat reserves and habitat corridors. Habitat corridors would be things like when you have this, the habitat fragmentation. So you've got pasture land over here, subdevelopment over here. You've got some forest over here and some wetlands over here. Consciously designing the landscape with corridors of natural vegetation that let animals get from one of these pods of habitat to another without being across a road, without being through people's yards. So like, if you have a creek going through a pasture, or you have land that you're selling the timber on, you don't log it all the way down to the dirt. You at least leave a patch through the riparian area, meaning, around the waterways, that can stay natural, that can stay supporting that, little strip that the animals can then keep active naturally and migrate from one area to another. I stress that so much because that's a big thing that even small landowners can do. I mean, it's not going to apply to an apartment dweller, but every little bit of habitat that you can make more animal friendly is important. And I want people to feel like they can pitch in. You may not be able to solve the deforestation of the Amazon, but you can make your yard friendlier for little critters. You can make an oasis where critters can find a drink on a hot day and things like that. Bird lovers have been doing this stuff for a while with bird feeders and all that kind of stuff. Reptile and amphibian lovers need to catch up and start doing that stuff too, in my opinion.
What would we do in our yard?
I have a video about that, and there's the best place to look is there's a whole lesson in the book on it. So there's other techniques like captive management, where with threatened species, they may collect some, bring them back, start a breeding population, and then re-release the head start of animals into the wild. Conservation, though, ultimately, in my opinion, starts with educational programs such as this. We have to infuse conservation into our daily thinking for it to happen. And the more people that are doing that is the more that we're reaching a critical mass of change. And it needs to happen a lot faster than it is. But you can only change the world a person at a time. So
We're doing it.
yeah, we're doing the best we can anyway. And incidentally, the Partners in Amphibian and Reptile Conservation has a disease reporting task force. You don't have to memorize this link, but just realize that it's there. If you see a snake or some other critter that seems to have some odd fungal problem or issue going on with it, take a photo and report it to the people that want it to be reported. And here's some images that are disturbing, but show you, just how serious this stuff is. This is that snake fungal disease that you're talking about. It attacks the keratin, like our hair and fingernails, is what makes up scales and shells of the critters. And there's a keratin aspect to skin in general. So there's also an amphibian version that basically hardens their skin so that respiration that's normally supposed to take place can't, and they end up with electrolyte imbalances and get heart attacks. So not long ago, maybe 10 years ago, this is what the map looked like. I don't have an updated map right now, but I can tell you that this is way out of date, even though it wasn't that long ago. Are y'all in here? Basically, the only reason that there weren't more dots on this map is because we hadn't had money to look for it. Every time we go out looking for these fungal diseases, we start finding them. In more countries than just the U.S. Even though I think it was like 2006 or 7 was when it was first. Yeah, 2006 was when we first described it in the U.S. It was something that was around before, but it wasn't, to our knowledge, affecting animals on wide scale levels like it is now. And we don't have to dive deep into it, but just be aware of snake fungal disease, and chytrid is the amphibian version. And you might research it a little bit more, because the more we're aware of it, the more we can report it, the more we can bring a more accurate scientific understanding to its range and effect. And I got a couple of videos we're going to see on this topic, short videos.
Chytrid fungus is a microscopic amphibian pathogen. It's one of the first wildlife diseases that has truly gone global by the time we really existed. One of the greatest issues with chytrid that makes it so severe as far as conservation is that it can affect nearly any amphibian species. So of the 7,000 known species of amphibians, any one of those could potentially go extinct from this single pathogen. And it's alarming to watch these frogs disappear. We have established the Honduras Amphibian Rescue and Conservation Center, a head start and captive breeding program. What that means is that there are certain life stages of the frogs that seem to be more susceptible to dying from chytrid, and that's the tadpoles and the minnows. From the long-term work that we've done in Casico, we've noticed that once they become adults, the few that do survive are then resistant. So the activities that we're doing here at the park is basically removing the weakest animals from the park, which are the young animals, bringing them here to our facility at Masatia, cure them of chytrid, which can be done in captivity, and then raise them into adults. And then reintroduce those animals back into the Casico so they can become part of the ecosystem once again. In my opinion right now, the best long-term solution is to find a way to have these frogs continue to exist in the natural habitats, and to continue breeding on their own, and creating offspring which potentially may become subject to natural selection, and hopefully evolve their own resistance. Although the young ones will still be susceptible, there will be many more of them around. So a minimally invasive method of assisting evolution, and letting it take its course, but by providing animals to work with. Doing something about chytrid means applying the science that we know, and taking some risks. We don't have a template to work from. This has never been done before. And that's part of the reason why we have to take risks, and why it's more difficult, complex, and challenging, is that we can't prove to people that what we're doing is going to work, or it's going to fix things, because this is a new territory. And all we know are the consequences of inaction. And that if we don't do something, we're going to have a lot of problems.
Jonathan Colby's a great fellow, international non-scientist, attends the CITES meetings that determines what is actually endangered versus threatened and that kind of thing. And he's from the U.S. here and works with amphibians primarily. Here's a little one about the salamanders.
Hi, my name is Jonathan Colby, and I'm a National Geographic explorer. And today, I'm here to talk to you about something called salamander chytrid fungus, or Rotacochytrium salamander boreans, which roughly translates to salamander eater. This organism is an aquatic fungal pathogen, which we believe evolved in Asia, and very recently was spread to Europe through the international wildlife trade, where currently it is devastating populations of fire salamanders, nearly to the point of extinction. Here in the United States, we have the highest number of salamander species in the world, and we were very concerned about the arrival of this pathogen. That is why I'm asking for your help to help me find it. I started a citizen science project on a website called iNaturalist, and my project is called Saving Salamanders with Citizen Science, where I'm asking anyone that goes outside to please keep your eyes open for salamanders. If you ever see a dead one or a sick one, please take a picture with your phone, with your camera, whatever you have. It does not have to be a great picture, it just has to be a record of what you saw. And upload it to my site, where I will be monitoring all of these records and keeping an eye out for anything alarming or unusual that might warrant a follow-up. And with your help, with all your eyes and ears out there, we could probably find this much faster than by conventional methods. And that extra time means that your help can help us prevent extinction. And we couldn't do this without you. So please, join us.
So those are, that's just one example of the many different citizen science needs that are out there. Try to be sensitive to the fact that there's a lot of needs like that. And all you have to do to help with that is keep an eye out when you're outside. You know, have your phone on you, take a picture. There's so many ways that you as an individual, even though you're not a part of a big national frontline organization, can make a meaningful difference, even though it doesn't seem like a whole lot. And it doesn't take a whole lot of effort. When you become a naturalist, you're becoming a citizen scientist, in my opinion. And in my opinion, you have a responsibility to try and add to the scientific knowledge at the same time as we're trying to inspire others to do the same. And that's an example of something like that. All right, so now more Louisiana-specific stuff. We're not going to go into each ranking, but just like worldwide, there are rankings such as endangered, threatened, near threatened, etc. Our state has levels of ranking for the animals that live here. And now we're going to get into what we have around here. Some of you people online may or may not care about this particular point, but here we are. The 16 state-listed species of salamanders. That means there's 16 different species that are threatened enough or have enough pressure on them that there's a ranking for how threatened they are, which is a bunch. Out of those three, right here where we are, we're listed as being in range for eastern tiger salamander, Strecker's chorus frog, and crawfish frog. So learn what those look like and keep an eye out for them. The eastern tiger salamander, I don't think is around here anymore, except for there's one little isolated record in Bossier Parish that was a result of a fisherman releasing some stuff in the pond. But in any event, the point is there are threatened animals in your own backyard, so to speak, that it's worth keeping a lookout for. As far as the reptiles go, we've got 32 state-listed species, of which 10 occur around here. Those are the ones in red. Some of these are a little more common than others. Like the Texas horned lizard, I don't think there's any more around here. They're considered extirpated, meaning extinct from this area. And then there's other species. The higher the number, the more threatened they are. So you've got things like the southern prairie skink that's S1. I only know of one person that's ever claimed to see one that I believe. And then we have other things like the glass lizard that's S3. So it's still less. There's still fewer out there than there should be, but you've still got a chance of seeing that if you're looking in the right habitat. Snake save lives. If you didn't already know it, look in the book. There's more detail on examples of this kind of stuff, but we're in ACE inhibitors. I mean, if you know anybody that's being treated for heart conditions, you've almost certainly got snakes to thank for that. We develop more and more medicines from their venom all the time. And it's, since the hemotoxic venom that works on the blood, is already a naturally occurring substance that has a very distinct effect on the blood, scientists take that and pick it apart and try and identify just which enzymes and aspects of that do what, and then figure out how they can use that to help people that are having a problem doing that. And it happens a lot more than a lot of people think. But rather than delve too deep into that, it's in the book. Look up that page. Here is my own little conservation video that I made. This is some tips for what you can do on the road to reduce your chances of injuring critters crossing the road.
Hey everybody, this is Micah, the Louisiana Exotic Animal Resource Network. I'm a wildlife rehabilitator, and one of the things that I do is glue turtles back together after they've been hit by cars. I don't mind doing that, I love these little guys, but I'd much rather not have to. So me and Jack, he's a three-toed box turtle, he's one of our animal ambassadors, are here today with the message to please watch the wildlife as you drive.
Questions about conservation concerns before we dive into observation? This is the fun part. These are photos from a previous year where we went just this morning. The same trails we walked on and stuff. All right, field guides. People are always asking a lot of questions about identification, and a great thing that you can do is to join one of the Facebook groups for reptile and amphibian identification, because you're going to get reinforced every day by seeing pictures of these animals, seeing IDs being provided. Pretty soon you're going to start playing a game with yourself and trying to guess before you look in the comments, and you'll start to find it's not going to be overnight, but over time you're going to get better to the point where you're like the people that run the groups and can just read the stuff off as soon as you see. But oftentimes you need a location, and that's because there's a lot of critters that look very similar, and this species may occur here, and this species may occur here, and even if there's some overlap, you're often not going to see these tiny little identifying characteristics from a photo. So if somebody says this photo is posted from Virginia, you're automatically going to say, oh, well, that's a northern water snake, as opposed to somebody that was posting, from a part of Oklahoma where there aren't northern water snakes, but there are plain-bellied water snakes that can look kind of similar as juveniles. Knowing ranges makes a huge difference in identifying animals. So the way that you learn these is by field guides that have maps and stuff in them. All field guides are not the same, so I want to give you a brief description of your general options. One standby that's been the, standby since I was a kid that I used to go everywhere with is the Audubon Society field guides that we've got some up here, but I don't need to hold them. Those are the ones with the plasticky, leathery looking cover. And those are pretty because they have photos of the animals, which is good and bad. Having actual photos is nice because you can get intimately familiar with the exact appearance of that animal. But the downside of ones that are just photographic like that is many reptiles and amphibian species, in amongst the species, the individuals can vary greatly in appearance. So I can't count how many times I've got somebody that was looking at a cricket frog or looking at something, and they're looking at an Audubon field guide, and they found this thing over here, and they're thinking, well, the map says that this species is what we have around here, and this doesn't look anything like that. But when you look at something like the Peterson's field guide, you find these purposely drawn composite drawings of the animal, which helps your eyes back off of some of that minute detail that is going to vary so much with the individuals and help you more classify, the animals based off of their species, accounting for that variation. Does that make sense why a drawing would be better than a photo? So I'm not saying don't get Audubon, get them all. As far as I'm concerned, I've got them all. But most serious naturalists are going to point you towards something like the Peterson's Guide because it's got excellent range maps. It does have some photos, but it's got those line drawings, and it has a lot of differentiating diagrams. This is the big part of making reptile and amphibian identifications, is looking at these specific little characteristics, like what shape certain scales are and things like that. And you can learn that stuff online over time, and you can ask online, and some of us can tell you, but if you buy one of these books, you can look in the books and see it for yourself. This pattern right here means it's an eastern soft shell. This pattern right here means it's a Gulf Coast soft shell. You can have all that information at your fingertips by investing in these. So here in Louisiana, we also have the option of getting Bounty and Carr's book, Amphibians and Reptiles of Louisiana. Excellent book, has the benefit of being specific to us. If you live in a different state online, see if there's one that's specific to your area. And anybody that's lucky enough to live in the southeastern United States, there's a whole range of books by Wick Gibbons et al. There's one for frogs and toads, one for turtles, one for lizards. These are not guides that you would carry in your pack out on the trail. These are things that after you've been on the trail and taken photos and you're back home, you can look through and ID with a wealth of more detail than you're going to find in a typical field guide. So a serious naturalist is going to have a quick reference with good maps, and they're probably going to have one that's specific to their area so they can learn about specific threats and different things that they should know about in their own backyard. And then it's also going to have books with more in-depth resources to be learning in more detail. Again, my suggestion is to get all three, but here's just kind of a brief overview of your options out there. Every naturalist should have field guides, period, in my opinion. That's a flat out statement. All right, so field herping means going out to look for reptiles and amphibians in the field. Some people think it's super weird, particularly sheriff deputies that have pulled me over the years. Wondering why I'm making a U-turn in the national forest at 1 a.m. But it's really not that different than other popular activities such as bird watching and so forth. Similar gear and methods apply with some variations. You don't usually see birders carrying snake hooks, for example. In Louisiana, you may observe and pick up herds freely like we did with those snakes and lizards we encountered this morning, but you need a fishing license to collect them. I recommend not collecting them. But, if somebody... I'm also not one of these staunch people that say you should never, have an animal in captivity or whatever. A huge amount of the world-known herpetologists that are alive today started out like little kids, like I did, and some of the of our groups, bringing a box turtle home for a while. Now I know you should never do that. But at the time, it was what fostered my, interest in these animals and, set me on a path for life of trying to help them. So there's a give and take to it. We're not going to delve too deep into that. But the chances of, like I said, spotted herps are much greater when you think about the things that we've been talking about them today. They're ectotherms, so they're tied to sunlight, they're tied towards moisture, they're tied towards temperature gradients and so forth. Learn like transition areas. You've got that big sunny area that we were walking through earlier. You've got the wooded area that's over here. And the reason we were walking along the edge and seeing little skinks and stuff is because those animals like being able to come out in the sun and then hop back into the cover in the shade. And you're more likely to see them if you start becoming aware of that type of thing. Frogs, of course, can be spotted by following their calls. Frogs give away their location. Other reptiles and snakes and stuff don't make noises. So it's easier to find frogs than others if you're using your ears. And other than venomous snakes, by and large, your hands are the easiest way to pick up one of these critters. Like a lizard, you saw me catch the skinks earlier, or the snake, I put my hand down on them as they're skittering gently, and then, pick them up from underneath to show them to you guys. If you were to try and pick these critters up with tools or other things, you can easily injure them. Like most people, if they're trying to catch a snake, they'll pin its head with some sort of stick or something, hold it down. Well, snakes have delicate little ribs. Teaching people to avoid that is something I'd like to do. Don't pick up venomous snakes at all. That's really easy. Don't pick up any snake that you don't know for sure is harmless. That's pretty easy. If you don't know what species the snake you're looking at is, simply take 3 steps back and walk away. Boom. One fail-safe rule covers all situations. But, like this morning, if you're leading a hike and you're picking up these critters, it's easy to just do it with your hands gently. Researchers use other methods such as drift fences, pitfalls, nooses, turtle traps, and the like. Those are, more effective, but it's kind of cheating a little bit. Kind of like, a bass fisherman is going to scoff at the guys running the trot lines because, that's kind of cheating. But it's a good way to collect fish, and like for the scientists, it's a good way to collect their specimens. They're not looking to enjoy the outdoors for the afternoon so much as they are to actually gather specimens so they can do their research. And then there's some tips and tricks, such as ways that you can rig up PVC pipe and some other things in your yard to attract tree frogs. Again, I've got details in the book about that, which is free online, or you can order it. Y'all can get it here today. Some tips that you should know more than the basics. Snapping turtles are best handled. I'll just show you. Now, okay, there's different schools of thought on how to handle snapping turtles. Alligator snapping turtles, there's one school of thought. You grab them right behind the head and right above the tail, like I do also with common snapping turtles. But some people handle them a little bit differently. Alright, so if you see here, she's trying to be threatening, but she's not the girl from the movie Poltergeist. She can't turn her head all the way around backwards. So if you have your hand directly above her, and you can even wedge your head down a little bit if you needed to, you can carry her safely like that. But you need to be in the right place. This is not the same as grabbing them over here above a foot. When I'm talking about handling them like this, I'm talking about directly at the front and directly at the back. And they can be easily lifted and carried over to safety. Now, if you're not used to handling reptiles, I'm not going to advise you pick up a snapping turtle. But what happens if you see one in the road and you need to get it off? Well, there's different ways of doing it. You can keep a towel in your truck and throw a towel over them to wrap around them. You could pick them up. The way some people do it is grab a back leg, which they're not going to appreciate you doing. But grab a back leg and put your hand under their plaster. So I securely have hold of her leg so she's not going to fall off my hand, and my hand is bearing the weight. And you notice that both my hands are in the same spot, so that this foot that I'm holding can't scratch this arm where it's sitting. If you had your hand on the other side, you could quickly find out that these guys have some serious claws and know how to use them. So, there's a lot of people out there, and there's probably a lot of different ways to do it, but those are your two basic options. And it kind of carries over to other turtles. Anything with a mouth can bite. But with a lot of other turtles, you can grab them with one hand underneath and one hand above, because they're not quite as imposing as snappers. You can see her trying to get a hold of my hand. She's just wanting to feel safe and secure. When I'm holding her flat like this, she's not doing that because she feels safe and secure. So the idea is if you help the turtle not feel threatened, you're going to have less trouble with it. The big problem people have when they're trying to help animals or move animals is they don't have the courage of their convictions. If you're coming up to a snake and you're doing this number here where you feel like you need to get him because he's gotten in your carport or garage or something like that, and you're pretty sure he's harmless, but he also looks like he's going to bite, so you're like, reaching closer and further away. The snake's picking up on that. You're acting like either a predator or a weirdo, and you're encouraging a bite response. If you just calmly have the courage of your convictions, when I go and rescue snakes, the first thing I say to the snake is, "Hey, don't worry, I'm not here to hurt you. I'm just hoping to get back outside." Now, can I prove that helps? No, but none of them have ever bitten me, so maybe it helps a little bit. Who knows? You gently reach underneath the snake. So, I don't know if the folks online can see us or not, but a predator, like a hawk or coyote, is going to grab a snake from above and lift it. If you reach underneath and support the snake's weight, you're automatically sidestepping the instinctive defensive response that they're going to feel from being clutched from above. So that's one little tip. But, mainly it's about being calm and confident. If you are not, nervous and jerky and gripping them too tight and restraining them so they feel like they can't get away, or, squeezing so hard that you're hurting them because you're not sure about what you're doing, all of that stuff is going to cause a snake to bite you just like any other animal. If you went and picked up your cousin's, chihuahua or something roughly, you're going to get bitten. So it's not that snakes want to bite you. But another big one is just what I'm doing. You can see that I'm letting the snake move. He doesn't feel trapped. He's doing what he wants, and I'm supporting his weight as evenly as possible. However, these guys are a good example. When I pick up a wild rat snake that I've never met before, he's comfortable on my arm and is not trying to bite me. But if I put my hand over here, there's other motions near his head that can make him be defensive. And it's kind of funny. You're being held by this hand that you don't mind, but you're fussing at this hand that's on the same body. And it's because it's approaching differently. You need to just learn to think from the critter's perspective. A lot of animals seem to understand, like that snake earlier. You saw the ribbon snake that we picked up. There's a video in the event, for those of you that haven't looked at it already. Picked up a ribbon snake, and his first instinctive action was to regurgitate the frog that he'd eaten. And he threw it up and still had it by its feet, and was preparing to drop it so he could make a quick getaway. But he didn't want to let it go entirely because it took all morning to find that frog. And after a few minutes, he relaxed in my hand, just like the snake has done, because I wasn't restraining him, I was letting him move freely. And it didn't take long before he realized I wasn't trying to eat him, so he went back to eating his lunch and swallowed that frog back down. So my point, again, if I'm making it clearly, is if you relax around the animal and you're gentle with the animal, that same animal is not going to be biting with you, whereas another person could try and handle that same animal nervously and jerkily and cause a bite response from that animal that didn't need to bite you and wouldn't have bitten you if you hadn't been acting like that. So it's not about the animal being aggressive, it's about us, learning to be comfortable around them and learning to be gentle with them. And it's not that complicated to do if you just try and think like critter instead of thinking like a person.
So what kind of snake is that?
This is a western rat snake. I'm glad you asked that because these guys are super common throughout their range. They are very outgoing. They're excellent climbers, and so they often find themselves in people's houses, on people's porches, on people's doorknobs, in people's dishwashers. The list goes on.
The wood pile.
You what?
The wood pile.
Yep. So since these guys are more commonly seen around disturbed environments, meaning our yards, they are more likely to be seen by people than other snakes, and consequently they often get killed a lot more than other snakes. So if I could just get people to recognize one kind of snake, it would be these guys, because that would go a long way towards saving a lot of snake lives. And we have a group called Rat Snakes in Predicaments, where people post their photos of the rat snakes in their appliances and their dish drawers and wherever else that they've gotten themselves into. And that, is an outreach tool and also an educational tool. There's a lot of variation among these guys. The older ones often get totally black. The younger ones look a lot more like this. The younger ones, you can see a pattern like this on them, pretty much all of them. But as they get older, some maintain this pattern in light, gray in amongst the dark blotches. Some of them get all the way dark. That's why I recommend joining a group, because once you've seen them look 100 different ways, you start to see the similarities across all of them and can pick them out at a glance. But it takes a little bit of practice. So,
that Texas rat snake, he's pretty common in this area.
yeah, that's what this is. It's another name for western rat snake. The rat snakes are a huge taxonomic mess. We used to think there was about 16 different species, a whole bunch. But recently they've, divided the Pantherophis genus,
Can we practice holding it too?
gray after the gray, eastern, and western rat snakes. They basically boil them down into fewer species. The Texas rat snake was one of those mini species. Now they boil them down to where all the ones in this area are western rat snakes. Just again, as we learn, the reason for that is we have the technology now to be sequencing DNA and finding out a lot more specific information about these animals than was possible or affordable to do before. And as we run those tests and make those comparisons, we find that the animals have different relationships than we had thought when we were just looking at them visually. Alright, so soft-shell turtles have an extremely long neck, and it's very difficult to handle them without experience. They can reach all the way back to the middle of their shell. It's almost impossible to safely hold the animal, because you can't just hold a soft shell from the back of the shell. If you're far enough forward that you're securely supporting the animal, you're far enough forward that they can wrap back around and bite you. So I can still handle them. Someone experienced, like I was showing you with the snake, can handle them comfortably and gently to where they're not doing that. But somebody that's in a rush and just trying to get them off the road is liable to get bit. So again, you might carry a towel in your car or something like that that you can toss over them so you can pick them up and move. Other turtles can usually be handled with one hand above and below their shell, like this. This is, you're keeping them from dropping, you're holding them securely. Nothing real complicated about it. Lizards, some lizards can bite hard. Broad-headed skinks, for example, around here, they're not that big. They're only about, 8, 9 inches long. But they can give you a surprising bite, which, you can tell just by how big their heads are and how big their mouth is compared to their body, but they're muscly little critters. But even the ones that bite, quote-unquote, hard, they're not causing you any real damage, even if they leave a little red mark. There's no reason to be afraid of them. So I remember Steve Irwin, for example, used to purposely hold gators or crocodiles, not the big ones, younger ones, and knew handlers that were going to be working around them. He would specifically have them get bitten so that they could train themselves to not overreact and either hurt the animal by pulling teeth out or hurt themselves by creating big gashes where there wouldn't have been if you'd stayed still. That's a big part of that calm confidence is anything with a mouth can bite, but that doesn't mean you're going to the hospital. It just means, it might surprise you for a second. So try not to get too worried about bites for the most part, other than, of course, venomous snakes and some of the bigger critters like snapping turtles. Even snapping turtles are not the way people think they are. Somebody rigged up a broom handle to snap more easily than it normally would years ago, and a video circulated around about how they'll just snap right through a broom handle. That's not real life. She bit me. I think there might still be a little tiny mark right there as I was examining her, and I got distracted by the wife talking to me. Now, granted, she's missing part of her face, but critters out there hurt a lot less than you think they will, is my point here. And realizing that can help you be more calm around them instead of the overreaction that our mind usually goes to. Just to start with the tools, a lot of this stuff is the same stuff birds have, like I was talking about, camera, binoculars, so forth. You can get a snake hook if you want to be fancy and use it either to handle snakes if needed, if you're rescuing them, or to flip over things on the ground to look for snakes. If you can't afford a snake hook, you can go to the garden center and get you a $10 potato rake, and that works just as well for flipping over logs and things like that. You can get snake tongs, but I recommend against it. Most people don't need them. It's easy to injure a snake using tongs. If you do need to rescue a venomous snake and you do need tongs for whatever reason because of where they are, they make some that are designed to be gentle, and learn what those are before you go buying stuff. Y'all saw all those mosquitoes on me earlier. It's a good idea to have insect repellent when you're in the woods, but on the other hand, I try not to use it if I'm planning on actually touching any critters because I don't want to get that on them. If you're looking for amphibians that it's handy to scoop up tadpoles or scoop up salamander larvae. I've got a half-hour video about herping here online if you want to really look into what all is out there that might make your time better. All that stuff I was carrying on my stick. There's a video of what all that stuff is if y'all are interested. You should know about iNaturalist that Dr. Colby mentioned earlier. You should also know about HerpMapper. iNaturalist is a citizen science platform for all organisms. HerpMapper is a citizen science platform specifically for reptiles and amphibians. Great to know about, great to contribute to. You should be taking photos of critters in the wild, and you should be uploading reptiles and amphibians to both of these databases. And there's also Frog Watch USA, which is a good one for AZA Citizen Science Program. And so this is what it's going to look like as you get in the habit of uploading these records. It's going to have where it was, when it was, what it is. If you're not sure what it is, you can leave that blank, and other people on the platform can help you identify it. And then scientists can use this data in their research. I've been contacted by scientists from, all different parts of the country because I happen to find a certain, thing around here that they are researching, and it's hard to find, and every record becomes important, so they're scouring the internet looking for this, and then they reach out to get more detail. What type of environment was it in when you found it, so on and so forth. So you can really make a difference getting in the habit of contributing this stuff. Like I said earlier, just don't handle venomous snakes. Easy rule. Don't handle any snake if you're not sure what it is. The only people who should handle venomous snakes are people who have a good reason and are trained. And if that's not you, just don't do it. Just as you should treat every gun as if it were loaded, treat every snake as if it were alive. Many people have been envenomated by handling quote-unquote dead snakes, like we mentioned earlier, and even a decapitated head can still envenenate. So just leave them the heck alone. Easy rule. Here's some tips. Don't put your hands or feet in places you cannot see. Don't turn over rocks and logs with your hands. That's why we carry snake hooks, is so that if there's a piece of metal reaching under that board instead of my fingers when I'm lifting things up. Don't crawl under fences and buildings without looking carefully first. In the wild, basically don't do anything. Sit, stand, or walk without looking at what you're doing. That's the best way to keep out of trouble. Don't wear low-cut shoes, or basically don't dress like me when you're in the woods. Dress like Larry with his pants and his long-sleeve shirt. Don't gather firewood after dark or without looking carefully. Don't sleep on the ground near wood piles, cave entrances, or swampy areas. Don't disturb snakes. Don't try to kill snakes. Don't handle dead snakes with your hands. Don't attempt to capture snakes unless you're skilled at it. Don't get within a snake's striking distance while trying to identify it. That's a big one. You would think that would need to be said, but believe me, it does. Don't travel alone in areas known to harbor high populations of snakes. Don't stay near a snake if it bites you. If you do get bitten by a venomous snake, you do not need to bring that snake to the hospital. You do not need to keep hanging out around that snake for any reason. Get the heck away from it so it doesn't bite you again. You've already freaked it out and got it upset enough to bite you the first time. Leave it alone. And don't forget that venomous snakes can, not that they normally do around here very often, but they can climb trees. They can bite underwater. I mean, cottonmouths, people ask if they can bite underwater. It's like, yeah, they do that all day long if they're hunting. They do occur at high altitudes, or high elevations rather, and they may enter salt water. All right. So if you're someone that wants to reduce snake sightings, I'm not one of those people, but you know, y'all all know people that do. You can pass along. We have a video about this, or there's a bulletin in there you can print off about this. But the tips for that are: first off, realize that they're a part of the ecosystem, and they're there all the time, whether you see them or not. Snakes are just looking for the same thing the rest of us are: food, shelter, protection from predators, etc. There's no such thing as a snake repellent. Just because you can go to Tractor Supply or Walmart and see something that says snake away does not mean that it actually repels snakes. It is snake oil, essentially, being sold off the back of a wagon to people that, you know, want to spend money on snake repellent. That's the reason Home Depot stocks it, is because people buy it, not because it works. Manicured yards with fewer hiding places is how you see less snakes. You know, not having a bunch of boards and pots and plants and stuff, places for them to hide all over the place. To keep snakes out of your house, the only way you can do that is to close up all the gaps and cracks. Have a handyman or yourself go around and close up plumbing and service entrances. A place where the coolant line goes into the brick and into your house. It's the same place that a rat snake is going to come into your wall and look around for mice. You have to physically seal your house up to keep them out. And don't offer food. I mean, if you've made your backyard a habitat for squirrels and birds and other wildlife, you've made it a habitat for rat snakes and water snakes and all these other things that are looking for those animals. So, don't be surprised when they come as a bundle. If you don't want them, you need to, do the opposite. Oh, look, and we have the video right here. It's only a couple minutes. Let's watch it. So here's another good one, because this comes up all the time. What do you do for snake bite? So, like the video says, do you see things in the camping stores, snake bite kits and stuff like that? It's all garbage. The snake bite kit is keys and cell phone. The key to drive you to the hospital, cell phone, let them know you're coming, or if your symptoms are severe, keys to phone to call an ambulance. If you've been bitten by a venomous snake, it's okay to call an ambulance. That's a reasonable use of an ambulance. However, a lot of our snakes aren't that potent. You might have a mild bite, and you might be fine driving yourself, and it might be quicker that way. But in any event, that's the only things that you should be doing. You shouldn't be fumbling around with tourniquets or any of this other stuff. You should just get to a hospital. Any questions? Because people often have questions about that. All right. There's some more tips, like, keeping a viper bite above heart level. They used to think it was below heart level, but they found out that it does better higher. And things like that. Again, read the book. There's more details in the book than you can read. Oh, we're almost at the end of the everything except the IU stuff, so now you have to watch the ad from my book. It's only like a minute. That's the cost of coming to this. You're watching 1 minute ad. So this is education that you can get a few minutes at a time. So each page is its own thing. When you want to look something up or read about it, you just look at the table of contents and go right to it. Easy to navigate, easy to get through. We got everything about, there's an example of more details on the grass snakes I was talking about, more details on why you should be moving turtles around, and things like that. You get some right in where you want to. So the rest of our time can be spent talking some more about local species. Those of you online that don't care what lives around here in the southeast U.S. can go skateboarding or whatever it is you're going to do next. You're welcome to hang around them. So who knows what this is?
Copperhead.
Yep, good job, copperhead. Here's the critters that live around us. Lizards, we have 10 species. The green and old, prairie lizard, usually called fence lizard, southern coal skink, that's one of those rare ones, common five-line skink and broad-headed skink. This is a broad-headed skink, a juvenile. There are two similar-looking species, the five-line skink and the broad-headed skink. Both look like this when they're young. They're slippery and hard to hold on to, so that's why I'm not letting you I can't get a better look for you yet. Alright. So they have these lines down their body, and as they're young, they have the blue tails. The blue tails are thought to either deter predators by being a bright, unnatural color, which can signal danger sometimes, or just make it more likely that the critter is going to see that and aim for it as they're trying to prey on the animal. As they get older, that blue tail fades. And on the males especially, the stripes fade. Usually the females retain these stripes as they get older. The males get a bright orange head during mating season. So if you see the bigger ones, you can tell them apart, their sexual dimorphism, from head color during breeding season, and usually from the stripes year-round. The only way to tell the two apart, one is by size. The broadhead gets larger than these guys, so if you're looking at a 9.5 inch version of this, You're looking at a broadhead, but if you're looking at a smaller one like this, you can't tell without looking at very specific scales, and that's what your field guide is for, is to help you learn those apart. We've got a little brown snake. We showed you that earlier in the field. That was the first critter we caught. We've got a southern prairie snake. That's another one of those rare ones. I've never seen one. You're probably not going to either. We got eastern six-line race runners. I love these guys. These guys have been clocked at 18 miles an hour, which for a critter this long is super impressive. So most people don't see them, not because they're not around, but because by the time you get to where it was, it has been gone for so long that, you know, it'd have to be quiet for you to have even heard it. Matter of fact, they're called field streaks, colloquially, in a lot of areas, because that's the only way people ever see them is a blur as they disappear off into the brush. We've got a western slender glass lizard, legless lizard, and Mediterranean geckos, the non-native ones. Some highlights, the ones I like, the little brown skinks, talked about them already. Green anoles, it actually used to be northern green anole, not just green anole. These are the ones you see on your fence posts. These guys have loads of personality. When you get to know these guys, they are so fun to watch. They've got so many layers to their character. They turn different colors when they get mad. You can tell that they're fussing at you half the time. When you see them out here doing this, raising their head and doing their dewlap out and things like that. Sometimes they're, doing a mating signal. But oftentimes, if you're close enough and you watch them do this, what they're saying is, this is my fence or my shutter or whatever, and you, by God, need to get back away from it. And they don't know that they're only 4 inches long. As far as they're concerned, they're the king of the landscape. They're just great to get to know. And the slender glass lizard is the one that gets mistaken when it is seen for a snake most of the time because it doesn't have legs. But they have eyelids, which snakes don't have, and they have ear openings, which snakes don't have. So besides some other characteristics, that's a pretty easy way to tell them apart if you're looking for that. This was one of those green anoles at the Master Naturalist Convention that was supposed to be for being too close to this tree. Didn't have a good angle for his camera shot. That's exactly what he's doing. It's telling me this is his tree, go away. Alright, so we have a few more turtle species, 14. Snapping turtle, alligator snapping turtle, southern painted turtle, western chicken turtle, that's one of those that's rare. You're probably not going to see those. Washita nap turtle, Mississippi nap turtle, eastern river cooter, three-toed box turtle, red-eared slider, Mississippi mud turtle, which we have one of those right here. This is an adult. Matter of fact, this guy's almost as old as I am. His previous owner had him for 41 years before he surrendered him to our rescue. And so we're not even trying to adopt him out. We're just going to let him live out his retirement age with us. But to me, it's fascinating to understand that stuff. When you're interacting with a little critter like this, most people is going to think this is just a little baby animal. When in real life, it's probably older than you. When you're so to me, respect your elders and all that. You should. Really give a lot more credence to some of these critters than I think a lot of people do. You can tell a mud turtle apart from a musk turtle most easily by what's called their pectoral scutes. These two triangular scutes right here, where your pecs would be, on a person, come to a point in the middle. And if you turn them sideways, they make a K. This line and these two lines make a K, which is the first initial of Canostranon, their genus, is a way to remember that. Mud turtles have trapezoidal scutes right here, meaning they come across more like these do, instead of to a point like these do. So they're hard to tell apart if you don't know them. This is another one of the same species, this little fellow. The reason we got him is these guys are very commonly caught in crawfish traps. So if you're a turtle lover and you live somewhere where people sell crawfish, you might go around and mention to the restaurants or the crawfish places, hey, if you run into one of these guys, I'll come get it. Don't throw them in the trash or kill them, because a lot of people don't know what to do. They weren't trying to, have a turtle. They were trying to, sell crawfish. So you might pitch in and help these little guys by, going around and picking them up when they're found. I get several calls a year with these guys, because they live in the same habitat as the crawfish and do all the same similar things. This is a baby red-eared slider, little ninja turtle. They start out small, and the difference between the red-eared slider and the yellow belly, you were asking about the yellow belly slider earlier, is the red ears have these patterns on their bellies, and the yellow bellies don't. But they're the same species, just different subspecies. This is a razorback musk turtle. This thing here. His name is Pepe because his shell to me looked like the old kind of conquistador helmet that the Spaniards used to wear. But you can tell these guys pretty easily because they have the most, you're ferocious, I know. They have the most pronounced keel going down their back, not on each individual scale, down their whole body of the turtles that live around here. And mud musk turtles are critters with much personality. It's fun to watch them and get to know them. And then the box turtles, I could talk all day about box turtles. We have educational campaigns about them. The main takeaways are they have a low replacement rate. So if you take one of these guys out of the wild, you may be taking one number of their population out permanently. They have close to a 1-to-1 replacement rate, meaning it takes one adult and a mate, but one adult female spending her whole life laying eggs for one of those youngsters to survive to be an old adult like she is doing the same thing. So,
how long do those live?
In excess of 100 years is the anecdotal evidence. Nobody has literally had one in the box for 100 years to count, but there's been turtles that were well known locally in the Northeast that, the individuals, the grandfather had known that turtle. They don't get out much. They tend to find a spot that they like. Size of a football field usually can range longer than that. They can have like a spring football field and a fall football field or whatever. But they're not. They don't have any wanderlust. They like to get there. I say they're like little old people. They get to know where the blackberries are. They get to know where the leaf pile is. They get to know where the earthworms are. And they got their little routines, and that's what they do. So if you move them just as far away as just a couple of miles, they don't have a homing instinct. Some people think that they wander because they're going back home, but when we've tracked them with transmitters, they go out in statistically random directions. So that turtle might head back to where he was found and live a happy life, but he's more likely to go any of these other directions and keep wandering, looking for his living room and never finding it until he gets run over, eaten by a dog or what have you. Do you have a question or just a question?
I have a question.
What's that?
Why does your oil stay like right there? Why does he always spend his time?
Why does he what?
Why does he always spend the time that he has in the cup?
Oh, she may be preparing to shed again, and so she's soaking to help facilitate that process. He asked why is Huffy sitting in her water today. Most of y'all know Huffy from her escapades online. Well, we'll get into snakes in a second. Turtles I like. So red-eared sliders, everybody that's ever called me about a turtle, except for like maybe 4 or 5 people, has called saying, hey, I've got a, what do y'all think the rest of that sentence is? A snapping turtle, and I need to come bring it to you. Every time, with the exception of 4 or 5 times, it's a red-eared slider, well, sometimes a cougar. It's either a slider or a cougar, similar pond turtles. And so, if you get familiar with these guys and know what they look like, you'll already be a more experienced naturalist than, so many people around you. Are you going to stick your head out there, Snicket? Snicket here was a pet that wasn't taken proper care of and had a very abnormal shell when he first came to us. I mean, he was big craters on either side and stuff. It's taken several years, and you can still tell where the odd growths were, but he's evening out a lot more now that he's had time in the sunshine and the correct diet and whatnot. I'm trying to get you to stick your head out, buddy, so they can see your pretty red ears. Now, those actually aren't their ears, of course. Those are just markings, but they're, where we think of ears as being. So that's how they got that name of red-eared slider. Yes, you're so ferocious. He likes my wife a lot more than me, actually. She can pick him up like this, and he doesn't open his mouth, and he does when I pick him up.
When you're picking them up in the wild, is it true that they have like salmonella
any animal, including your dogs and cats, can have pathogens like that.
Is it more common?
You should always wash your hands after you handle any critter. However, yes, reptiles may transmit salmonella. There's actually far less strains, individual species of salmonella organisms that live on reptiles that we are susceptible to than ones that live on mammals. You're actually more liable to catch salmonella from mammals than you are reptiles. So the blanket statement is just always wash your hands after you're handling critters. The reason why turtles are so associated with salmonella is because back in the 60s and 70s, the selling pet turtles was so common, literally you could get one for 10 cents next to the cash register at Sears at one point. It was just everywhere. And so everybody and their brother was trying to make some free money by throwing turtles in their septic ponds and all these other nasty environments so that they could be, making a few extra dollars. So what you ended up with was inexperienced farmers raising these critters in crowded, poor conditions, and then, taking the eggs out of the dirt that's right, in with all these other pathogens, and shipping them right out to people that had no training about, not even warned to wash their hands first. They give them to a little kid to play with. The kid puts them in their mouth. The turtle that was just in a septic pond 2 days ago. So it's not the turtle's fault. It's not the fault of turtles in general. It was a bad rep that they got from bad practices of people, and there's actually a law that's been passed that says you can't sell any turtles with less than a 4-inch carapace length because the Food and Drug Administration decided that was the size that was probably big enough that toddlers weren't going to fit in their mouths. So that's how all that happened.
What about penguins?
I'm not up on exactly every kind of parasite and organism and pathogen that different things carry. I just tell people to assume that any critter has any number of things, and don't put your hands in your mouth after. That's not that you can't touch them, but I wash my hands so many times a day. It really makes a difference. Back when a few years back, I was working with a herp that didn't have a whole lot of experience. She was basically the only one game enough to take the type of weird cases that I bring to vets at the time. And I had her treating tortoise that I handle these tortoises all day and all the time, and I've never gotten a least bit sick. But I'm forever washing my hands all throughout the day as I'm switching between tasks. And I brought her up here. She treated this tortoise one time and was home sick with food poisoning type symptoms for 3 days, just because apparently she wasn't in the habit of quickly, thoroughly, and constantly washing her hands enough. And I'm not trying to point blame at her. I'm just saying that you can handle these turtles every day with no problem. I'm living proof. Or you can handle a critter one time and get sick if you're not paying attention to what you're doing. So that's what it boils down to, is cleanliness, hygiene. I think my due daddy is actually getting low on battery. We'll see. So there are 8 species of salamanders. That's not many. The southeastern U.S. actually has the highest diversity of salamander species of anywhere in the world. But that's more common up in the mountains and further southeast you get. We're sort of on the edge of that. So we've got 8 species, really 7 if you discount the tiger salamander that you're not realistically going to see. We've got marble salamanders are one of the more common you come across. We've got dwarf salamanders that often get mistaken for worms. They're about the same size as these little brown skinks, and they're blend in with the dirt fairly well, and they like to be in moist environments. So usually if you see one, it's because you're lifting up something that has a bunch of earthworm tilled dirt underneath, and it's moist. And so a lot of times people wouldn't even realize that one of those glistening things isn't a worm, and it's actually a salamander. But they're more common than people would think. We've got 3-toed antheumas. Antheumas are salamanders that have tiny, teeny little legs. You can just barely make out this little edge of the leg here and here. So you've got a salamander that can be up to 40 inches long with legs about this long. It's way beyond T-Rex comical. And
that's around here?
Yep. So they often get mistaken for snakes by people that think anything without legs, without legs are snakes. But they're salamanders, and rather interesting ones at that. They're not like the sirens. Sirens live in water 100% of the time and have these, gill structures throughout their life. And humans live in water almost all the time, but they do come onto land to brood and clutch, just like the five-line skinks. They stick with their eggs until they hatch. Marble salamanders do that. Several salamanders do that, more so than you find in reptiles. So they can be on land. They can get a pretty distinct bite. I've seen one of these guys bite a cat, not a huge catfish, a smaller catfish, in two. I mean, they've got a pretty good bite on them. So don't pick them up willy-nilly if you see a big one.
What's the difference between a newt and a
A newt is a salamander. It's just a specific kind of salamander. It's the kind that has that extra life cycle where it switches between land and water and land and water again. And the ones we have around here are called central newts. Frogs. Now we're getting into more diversity. We have 17 species of frogs around here. Fowler's toad is native. We got two of these guys. It's very easy to make your yard toad habitat by doing something as simple as leaving a porch light on. Now the insect guys that like, gals that like moths are going to tell you don't do that. I'm not saying do or don't, but the fact is that if you leave a porch light on, you're going to have these guys around your back porch because they're catching those. They're not stupid. They know that those bugs are up there around the light. They know that some of those bugs are going to get too hot or tired and fall. And they make a very good living by just sitting there and getting fat, eating all those bugs. You can tell toad poop, interestingly enough, if you're a scatologist or down that vein of thought. Since toads, so reptiles, snakes, lizards, and amphibians, toads, poop with the dark stuff and the white stuff. The white stuff is urates. We constantly urinate and give out that uric acid and waste in that stream. These guys tend to retain water a lot better, so they expel that stuff in a more dense substance. So that's the white stuff. The dark stuff is the actual poop. And since these guys eat invertebrates, which have exoskeletons, you can push on that poop and it crumbles because it's basically a loosely jumbled bunch of exoskeletons.
Oh, I've tried that.
So whereas when you push on bird poop that's been eating worms and eating seeds and other things like that, it's a more solid mass.
I have a toad that's right around my house, and it has like one leg, and then like it doesn't use it, but there's like a small leg on it.
Yep, stuff like that happens with amphibians. Ooh, they's fussing at me. This is a male. The males have the dark chins. This is a female. She's got the light chin. And I don't know if he's responding to me holding them or just the fact that I'm holding him face to face with her. But here's another little new vocabulary word for you. You see how they're pumping their throat in and out like that? Those are called bucopharyngeal movements. And it's a way that they, breathe. And it's also the same type of mechanisms that they use to make the chirping sounds and the different calls that frogs make. But both of them are fussing. You can see them doing this number right here. They don't appreciate me holding them like this. But while we're on the topic, this is how you would typically hold a frog. It's around its waist like this because their front feet don't have a whole lot of oomph to them. It's their back feet that's going to cause them to jump out of your hand and possibly injure themselves or whatnot. So if you just gently hold them around the waist, you're going to get some pee on you like this that's rolling down off of you, piling up on the floor here, but everybody's going to be safe. And also to note, this is the same species. When I was talking about the difference among individuals earlier when you're looking at photos instead of line drawings, if you see a photo of a frog that looks like this, and a frog in the toad, same thing, in your hand that you're trying to identify looks like this, and all you ever see is a photo that looks like this, you're probably going to think this is a different frog. But it's learning that there's a lot of variation among individuals, more so with some species than others. Look how fussy these guys are getting.
And that's not because it's male female, that's just because they're just different colors.
Yes.
I thought those things, don't toads inflate their bodies when they're?
Yes, that's a defense mechanism that helps them. He asked, don't toads inflate themselves to look bigger. That's a defense mechanism that helps a lot of critters pass by them that might otherwise eat them, in addition to the defense mechanism of exuding the bufotoxin. And it's also what I was talking about the arms race in the wild. The hognose snake that we talked about having rear venomous fangs earlier, that's the purpose of those fangs, that's a purpose of those fangs. I don't know if there's any way that it's been proven beyond a doubt, but in real life, those of us that have observed it in the field enough times, as they start swallowing that toe down, those rear fangs puncture those sacs that are inflated to deflate the toad and help get him down. And it also has a better, spot to really dig in. And that mild toxin, while not life-threatening to us, helps subdue the toad from struggling so much as they're, being deflated and the struggle is going on. So, it's really neat how you see these critters, predator and prey, having all these little mechanisms that relate to each other like that. So we've also got Blanchard's cricket frog, formerly northern cricket frog. They just kind of scrambled them up recently, changed the names some. We have the bird voice tree frog. Oh, the Rio Grande turkey frog, the greenhouse frog. We do have records from around here, but they're alien species. Bird voice tree frog, green tree frog are native. Coast gray tree frog. I don't have any with me. Those are the ones that there's two species. Gray tree frog and Coates gray tree frog. They cannot be distinguished visually. The two species look identical. There's a lot of variation, but that variation, is identical. You can tell them apart by a certain mating call. That's how it was first discovered. There were two different species. The naturalist was listening, and he could tell that it sounded like there were two different frogs, even though it looked like he was just at a pond full of gray tree frogs. And they got to looking at their, tissue and running DNA and stuff like that, and they found out that they're two different species. So around here, the ones that you're almost certainly seeing, as far as I know, the only frogs that have been tested around here and found to be one or the other were Coates gray tree frogs. So when people ask me what one is around here, I answer that, not because I've heard them called or run tests on them. It's just, in all likelihood, that's what you're looking at. But if you're not looking at a range map in one of those maps and know the location that it's from, and you haven't heard it calling, there's no way to differentiate it. It's just an interesting example of why range maps are important and how, diverse these critters can be. And there's a PDF I can let y'all download later that has all this kind of stuff, so we're going to kind of skip a little bit over, because we want to see if we can get the calls. Okay, so this is what an American bullfrog sounds like. That was a bullfrog. Yep, there you go. We're going to have a chorus of frogs, but I'm still passing this stuff. Yeah, it's not going to work. This older computer. This older version of PowerPoint sometimes doesn't stop the previous sound before the next one starts. So, you don't have to, you're not going to memorize all this stuff from a brief PowerPoint anyway. There are resources online. If you Google USGS, that stands for United States Geological Survey, frog quiz, there's a database that you can just pull down, look for the name of the one you're trying to hear, and they have recordings like that. And what I actually do is I downloaded them and I put them on my phone, and I switch out my notification tones and different things to be in different frog calls. And so after a month of every time I got a Facebook message hearing pickerel frog, you have it ingrained in your head, what it sounds like without even trying. And then you switch it to something else, and you just remember that that tone that you're using right now is a green frog, you know. And it's pretty handy little trick for learning frog calls, is finding things like that that you learn through repetition. So if you're interested in learning all those calls, you have to find a way to get that repetition. And that was the way it worked for me, and it had not worked for you. But there's databases online where you can search out these frog calls. American alligator, I think we're going to breeze over them. There's a lot of info about they're famous critters as it is. I will say that Louisiana's farming methods are famous for having brought them back in Louisiana from the brink. They're now well established again to the point where people are allowed to hunt them. Whereas not that long ago, back in the 60s and 70s, we were thinking they were about to disappear. And it's our unique farming methods where they collect a clutch of eggs in the wild, raise the animals up. The 14% that we've found is about the number that survive in the wild, are brought back out and released where they were found, and the rest are what enters the food trade and the skin trade and that kind of thing. So we're ensuring that the number that are supposed to be living out in the wild are still getting there, and even more so because people have a vested interest in doing so. When it happened, ironically, a lot of environmentalists were picketing and talking about how that was going to be the end. It seems so counterintuitive. You've got the animal on the brink. Why would you allow, people to be collecting them and farming them and whatnot? But it was doing that in the way that we're doing it that has brought them back so well. Now, that's not to say that every time you hear some sort of wildlife safari, that's actually a conservation-oriented thing. Usually it's trying to, get money from the rich Americans or whatever. So just because you hear someone farming or hunting critters doesn't mean that it's a conservation effort. But believe it or not, when done correctly, it's an excellent conservation measure in certain circumstances. Other little tip I'll tell you is the distance between alligators' nose and eye in inches translates to the number of feet that an alligator overall is. The reason why that's interesting is because usually when you see an alligator in a pond or whatever, this is all you're going to see is this little part. You're never going to get a chance to measure the whole body, but that's how you know how long the whole body is. It's the distance between the eye and the snout. And but they've gone back and more recently and studied this again and run the numbers and measured a bunch of them and found yes, this is actually accurate. It's pretty much dead on. And I can't hear the alligator sound because the computer messed up. But the alligators, they do this subsonic bellowing. There's parts that we can hear and parts that we can't hear. That subsonic part that we can't hear travels through the water for great distances. And that those vibrations from that, you can see the bubbles bouncing up and down on top. So this is a big male saying, this is my spot now. I don't care who liked it before. He's doing this because there's a smaller male that was trying to move into the area off camera. And he's saying, I'm the biggest and the baddest. I'm showing you and warning you that I'm the biggest and the baddest. And the little one who thought he was going to be cocky, as he gets a little closer and sees how big this guy actually is. Oh, no, I had it backwards. He was the smaller one, actually. Here's the bigger one that actually lives here. And we're only seeing a little bit of it, but once this guy realized how big the resident one was, he took off in a hurry. But that's what you're seeing is, instead of them actually having to fight, they do these displays to determine, who's going to be the king. Oh, snakes. We don't have enough time to go into as much detail on snakes as I would like to, because I could talk with you all day about snakes, but we've only got a half hour left. So, take my word for it that they're beneficial. No, I'll give you a little more detail. There's no point in killing a snake. Another one's simply going to fill that gap. All you're doing is killing critters needlessly. Snakes aren't out to get you. They're native animals, just like birds or anything else. The animals that many of them prey on, like mice and rats and stuff, are introduced destructive animals that don't belong here. Mice and rats are one of the leading causes of house fires, getting into people's walls and chewing on wiring and stuff. So, the same people that kill these snakes that then complain about having rodent problems in their neighborhood, it's just unfortunate irony. So you don't have the sound, but this is an actual video of. Now I'm not going to say this happens because there wasn't enough snakes. That's not the point. The point is mice are capable of insane population explosions. So if you're triggered or scared of snakes and mice and rats, don't watch this next few seconds. This is in Australia.
Yeah.
That's just one farm where people let get overrun.
Okay.
I mean, what do you do? So I mean, this is not a mouse farm. This is a regular agricultural farm. They have these booms that happen over there. They grow a lot of grain, and for some reason, some years it's kind of a perfect storm, and all of the agricultural, offerings cause the mice to just explode like that. And mice are prolific breeders, so the predators are a good reason that we're not living in that kind of nightmare as a regular thing. So we've got 25 species of non-venomous snakes around here. We have, of those, the 4 that I want people to know the most, if I only had 4 to pick, would be the rat snake that I was talking about earlier. You can join rat snakes and predictions and see pictures of them all day long, so you get very familiar with what they look like. The caged brown snakes, my pointer is low on battery, sorry. These guys are small little 10, 11, 12-inch snakes that live in your garden. They eat worms, so they're places where worms are, like people's gardens. And for some reason, every hillbilly in the world calls these ground rattlers and chops them up, and it's very sad because these are awfully cute little critters, and they're perfectly harmless, and they're actually helping your garden by eating the slugs and stuff. So help your friends learn what those look like. Make sure they know they're harmless. This is a prairie king snake. I just love prairie king snakes. It's why I included them. They look a lot of people. They look a lot like rat snakes, but they're shiny. They're much shinier than rat snakes because being king snakes, they have those smooth scales, and you can learn to tell the blotches apart. The blotches on the sides and things like that are a little bit different. So it's an example of critters that you have to kind of work to learn the difference between. But once you've seen a bunch of them, it's plain as day as soon as you look at them what they are. And then the eastern hognose snake, we have the easterns around here. They also have patterns when they're younger, but many of the adults just kind of get to be a solid black when they're older, which is an example of my other pet peeve. I mentioned blue-tailed skink being one of my pet peeves. Black snake is another one. I'm not trying to be grouchy. It's just that there's so many people in ID groups and online that think black snake is a kind of snake. And really, it's a loose description of a bunch of different snakes that can be black. So some people could be talking about racers, some people could be talking about hognoses, some people could be talking about dark-faced rat snakes. Some people could be talking about plain-bellied water snakes. It's really a useless term that, I'm not going to get on to people if they use it because they're learning. But, it's like fingers on a chalkboard to me whenever somebody says blue-tailed skink or black snake. So water snakes are very common, and they're almost always called cottonmouths by the uneducated folks. Most of the time when you're by water, you're not seeing cottonmouths. You're seeing one of these water snakes that are very common around here. Here's a hognose snake. We'll go ahead and let that one play for those of you. Has anybody not seen a hognose snake play before? Not seen it. Okay. So hognose snakes do not bite people. Other than with the captives I was talking about earlier. Their first line of defense is usually to spread out and look like a cobra. In some areas, people call them spread matters for this reason. So even with this guy harassing him, he's not biting him. He's just trying to tell him, oh, I'm so ferocious. So the display didn't work, so now he's doing mock strikes. He's not even actually trying to bite the guy. The guy's right there. If he wanted to bite him, he could. He's just flinging his head like he's gonna. And so that's not working. And I don't encourage people to do this. That's why I have a video like this, so you don't have to harass a snake in the wild to see this. You've been able to see it on video.
Grass hog.
Yeah. Hang on. So, since that doesn't work, neither the feigning the bites or the spread mount have worked. We're getting into the last ditch effort, which is, oh, I'm so dead. Oh, I'm extra dead. My tongue is hanging out. I haven't pooped on myself a little bit, so I smell bad. I'm just extra dead. And it doesn't matter if you flip them back over, they will turn themselves right back like this. Oh, no, I'm actually dead. Super duper dead. We have a group for these guys too called Thespian Serpents Guild. It's a place where people can post pictures of hog noses that they come across with their heads flared out or being dramatic in other ways. Now then, what were you going to ask?
How did that ribbon snake sneak up on that frog if it had blue stripes?
I mean, the same way that frogs are not the best at avoiding predation. Me and you can walk by little ponds and stuff like that and catch frogs too, and as far as the frog's concerned, 1,000 feet tall. So a little critter that's right up against the ground has an even better chance of sneaking up on it. Frogs are just oftentimes not nearly as wary as they should be. So we have 5 venomous snakes in Louisiana that actually still live here. The Texas Gulf Coast coral snake, eastern copperhead, northern cottonmouth, western pygmy rattlesnake, and timber rattlesnake. Now you'll see some signage that also includes harlequin coral snakes and eastern diamondback rattlesnakes. We are in a part of their range. The toe of the boot of Louisiana extends into the very western edge of the range for those two species. But as far as I know to this day, there are no known breeding populations actually living here. Once in a while, somebody will see one, and there's no way to tell if it was one that was just, that managed to travel across state line a ways, or if it was in a shipment of lumber or other things that move about the same way these other critters get displaced. But as far as the recruitment and finding young, there being an actual established population, there are none known that I know of. You haven't heard anything, presume either. So I tend to leave them off these lists. Because I don't want people thinking there's more snakes than there are, but I still mention them because it's possible that if you're down in that area, you could possibly see one. So you should know what they look like. We're going to have to just skip some of the things that I find interesting that aren't as interesting. We're going to stop here because this is a picture of an actual hospital bill from a snake bite. $153,000.
Whoa.
And that's not all that unusual. That is on the high side, but it's not extreme.
So that antivenom was $83,000?
The antivenom can be like $1,000 to $1,200 a vial, and if you need one, you're going to need 10 a lot of times just to start you off. Then you're going to need to be in ICU if you're on antivenom, which is hundreds of dollars a day just to be taking up a bed there before you start counting the skilled nursing and other charges that are involved. The doctor I know locally that treats him, he says if he gets bitten by a snake, he basically just bought and crashed into his car. You can just plan on it, being at least that much. Insurance obviously helps with this. Depends on how you look at it. Insurance also inflates these costs as well. It wasn't 40 years ago you could buy antivenom for like $5 a vial mail order, but malpractice and all that other type of stuff jacks that stuff up quite a ways. So this is true and not true at the same time. A lot of people say that a venomous snake bite is going to look like this with 2 puncture holes, and a non-venomous snake bite is going to have your 0 teeth. In real life, a snake bite can look like anything. A snake bite can look like a laceration across your skin. you're very rarely in non-clinical situations going to find these exact patterns. But that is the bite pattern of the, a comparison of the bite pattern between a colubrid snake versus a viper. So here's pictures of the 5 species. Northern copperhead. We got one of those. I don't actually keep copperheads as a rule. I just rescued this out of somebody's porch the other day, and it's not really a good neighborhood for it. And I try not to relocate him, but this is like in the middle of the city. I know he's going to get chopped up if he's already in the habit of hanging out in people's houses. And I have a sanctuary place out in the woods where I have permission to bring him. That's the only reason I have one with me today. But they're beautiful critters, and they're quite docile. They have a reputation for being mean and chasing people and that kind of stuff, when the truth is really the opposite. And then we have Buffy up here with us today. She's got a lot of fans, I'm sure. She was brought to us because she has an infection that's manifesting externally as pus in her eye and swollen eye. And we've tried a few different treatment regimens. I've tried a few different other vets that I'm working with. Tried a few different treatment regimens, haven't been able to rectify it. It's at the point where she's getting surgery soon, probably this coming week. But I'm the kind of weirdo that will take in a wild snake from somebody because first off, you have to have someone weird enough that notices the snake is sick. Then you have to find somebody weird enough to be willing to take it in and treat it. And then you have to find a vet weird enough to be willing to see it and help out with it. But if you have that right combination of people, you get what we have here today, which is somebody that's been spending time and money trying to get a cottonmouth's eye to be free from infection for 2 months now. Anyway, I wouldn't have it any other way. I enjoy having them. So these are some extra pictures. You're not going to learn all these critters from these brief pictures that you saw in a workshop one time. You need repetition. The easiest way to get repetition is to join one of our groups or another group that focuses on reptile and amphibian identification, because seeing them over and over, especially with the variation, these are all the same species. This is the same snake, cottonmouth, cottonmouth, cottonmouth. So you got to learn not only what they look like, but all the different ways that they can look if you really want to be able to identify stuff quickly and easily. There is a study that I'm not going to go into right now. It's on the book. It's also on our online platform publication, and I want to make sure you know how to get to those. Some more copperhead photos. People often talk about identifying copperheads because of these Hershey's kiss markings. Usually when someone posts one for an ID, somebody within a minute is going to say, I see Hershey's kisses, it's copperhead. Copperhead. But in a minute, you'll see that's not always the case. So we've got the Texas Gulf Coast coral snake, and a lot of people, or I don't know how it got to be, a lot of people think that coral snakes have to chew on you for a while to envenomate you, and that there's fangs that are in the back of their mouth. As you can see from this photo, the fangs over this paperclip here, right in front of their mouth. And yes, compared to vipers, they do bite slow. So what we're meaning is the time it takes to blink your eye once or the time it takes to blink your eye twice. It's not you're safe as long as you don't let them hang on type of deal. It's a difference of split seconds. The point is they can envenomate very quickly and should not be handled. Even though I don't know of any reported deaths from Texas coral snakes, they often hurt a lot. Like, you need lots of pain medicine at the hospital. That's mostly what they're going to put you on. They actually rarely need to even administer anti-venom because they're, very painful but not usually life-threatening. So you're going to avoid yourself a world of hurt by doing that. So this is the part where we have 15 minutes that we might have. You know what we're going to do? We're going to pass these because y'all should all visit that article. You don't have to remember the name. The thing that I wanted to go in depth with about, it's really better if you take 15 minutes and read it. If you just Google venomous snake identification, one of the top results is going to be how not to identify a venomous snake by name. Click on that result and take 15 minutes to read that because it's you'll instantly be better at snake identification than 99% of your friends if you just do that one thing. So rather than me harp on it here, you can find it that way, or you can come to our publication, The Natural World, that has a whole bunch of articles like that. When you click on this, it's going to bring you to that, which is a part of this article. When you're done reading that, you can click on The Natural World and see a whole bunch more interesting stuff to read. If you're not already a member, join Live Snake Identification and Discussion. That's our Snake ID group. If you don't know how to search for stuff well on Facebook, you've got a short link here for this stuff. The snake article is bit.ly/S snake -ID. The snake group is bit.ly/live-snakes. So we're going to let you learn this stuff by reading that article. Oh, but we're not going to gloss past that. Don't get so stuck on these Hershey's Kisses that you can't recognize the same animal when they appear differently. This is not that uncommon to see these guys. We actually have a group for that too. It's called a Barren Wild Pit Vipers and Coral Snakes. These were both taken in Louisiana. I've seen several more photos of similar snakes. So the only thing that you know how to do to identify a copperhead is to latch on to this idea of Hershey's Kisses. You're going to be in a world of hurt if you try to pick this up and move it out from underneath your shed or whatever. So the point is, snakes have a lot of variation, just like the other birds we were talking about. These are examples of different ways copperheads are here. The ones up here with the wide banding at the top are broadband copperheads. Those are over in Texas. Those are west of us. We have the eastern copperheads, which these other ones are. Boreal pits, all the stuff's in that article. I'm going to read that article. Let's see what else we can get to before we're done. All of the stuff's in that article. I really, really want y'all to read that article. All of this stuff is stuff you're going to learn if you join the snake group. All right, so if you get online, here's our resources. We've got rat snakes and predicaments. That's the one where you see the rat snakes and all the funny, situations, and get to learn it real quick how to identify them. We have North American Native Reptile Keepers. If you do know of someone that wants to keep an anole or some other critter that is wild caught or native to here, this is a group specifically to help people have the best husbandry that they can and not have animals eating above them. We've got Herpetology Unlimited. That's a kind of a wide open forum where it's an adult forum. Any kind of language you want to use is not forbidden. So 18 plus, so to speak, is part of our following group. All the rest of our groups are family friendly, meaning cuss words and stuff aren't allowed. So we have moccasins not chasing people. It's a common myth that cottonmouths chase people and copperheads. However, even with millions of people with smartphones in the woods every day, nobody has managed to collect the slightest bit of any sort of verifiable evidence of this ever happened. You would think that by now, at least one person would have managed to get a video of a snake chasing someone, with cottonmouth or copperhead chasing. Hasn't happened. Probably isn't going to happen because that's against their nature. But in the meantime, while we're waiting for someone to produce that proof, we're uploading photos and videos all day long of the way that they actually act, which is much different than that. So we got our junior and adult herpetological programs that you can sign up for and get a certification. You got live snake identification and discussion. We got the Field Herping Collective. If you go out in the field like you did today and take pictures of reptiles and amphibians, you can upload your pictures and either ask for an ID or just show our pictures. We got aberrant wild coral snakes and pit vipers, where you see snakes that appear differently than they're supposed to. So you get to learn what some of these morphs and variations are. We have frogs and flow standards. That's frogs that are getting froggy when they're not supposed to be. We got Herpetology, that's the big one, like 80,000 members. That one's just kind of a fun group where we post pictures of reptiles that don't look imposing at all. They look ridiculous or, silly. Derby is what it's going to be. Testing and Serpents Guild, that's where you can see all the pictures of the hognoses and snakes acting dramatic. And Introduction to Herpetology, that's just kind of a catch-all group for new folks that might have questions to ask. And they're going to have your book signing here after I stop talking and sit down for a bit. And finished on time. 10 minutes early. All right, so we'll take the last 10 minutes to see if there's any other critters we didn't already get out. We have a... I'm going to be disappointed if y'all don't know what this is. What is this? Speckled king snake. Very good. Lamprepeltis holbrookii. They get quite a bit bigger than this. This is a young adult. They eat venomous snakes, among other things. Some people seem to think that's like all they eat is venomous snakes. And while they do eat reptiles, they'll eat pretty much anything that they can catch, vertebrates. So, you know, lizards, mice. All right. It's not a day unless you got snake musk on you. Just turned into a good day. That's why I carry spare shirts. Yeah, that was aggressively musk, you'd call that one. So the only other snake that would be liable to be confused with this one around here is the buttermilk racer. Because they have cream-colored mottling all over their body, kind of like this snake has the yellow spots. One of the differences is if you look on king snakes, they've got the speckled king snakes. They have one yellow dot on each scale, and they can be on different, you know, parts of the scale and form, you know, little patterns if you look closely. But the buttermilk racers have more random modeling. You could have a big mottled spot that several scales are white, and then all the scales around it are dark. It's not one spot on each scale like this is. We've got...
I have one of those that live down by my garden. Randomly, I would come across them.
Yeah, you can get to know them. They have, I have found in the places that I live, I don't know how big of a range, I should actually research that. I hadn't really. Somebody's probably tracked them by now with RF, you know, transmitters and stuff to see how big of a range they go in. But whether they go in a bigger or smaller range, I've noticed that year after year, you see the same snakes, you know, in the same areas. So they tend to have their little haunts and habits. And it's pretty cool when instead of you graduate from the mindset of killing them to the mindset of enjoying them. And then you can get to the mindset of getting to know them and learn about their different little unique ways. I think we actually picked everybody up. So we will say that if anybody wants to hold them more, we'll do so after we get done with the live video. And for anybody online, the folks here got a chance to glance at these on the tables. Y'all didn't. For anybody that still hasn't downloaded my book, which you can do for free, just go to learnaboutcritters.org and you can download this whole thing. And every page is a different lesson on a different subject. Easy to read. Got rave reviews by the SSAR, and the point of it is you can download this as a PDF. You can find things like these snake myths and frequently asked questions, and you can print them out. This is Creative Commons. I made this free to the world specifically so that you can download the PDF, print out just what you need, hand it to someone you're trying to educate, use it in your homeschool groups. Use it as a handout at a booth at a wildlife festival, just whatever subject you're interested in. Now, it's even better when you can share it online and not, use up trees, but the point is, that's a lot of why each page is a different lesson, is to make it easy to share this information with others, and you don't even have to pay any money to do it. However, if you want to support our rescue and you like a gorgeous coffee table type book, this certainly qualifies as that. And it's much cheaper than you would expect for the quality and the full color, photos on every page. So learnaboutcritters.org, and all the rest of y'all can go there too, even if you don't buy a book and download that in the class today. And that's the end of our live stream. So we're saying bye to you guys. I'll look at your questions later. Thanks for coming. And the rest of y'all can hang out as long as you like. And we can